Welcome. Happy Monday and welcome to another episode of Bitcoin Magazine Live. I'm your host, Q, coming to you live from Nashville at Bitcoin Magazine headquarters, and I'm joined by my co-host, P. How goes it, P?
As always, it goes amazing. See, I almost swore there, but I didn't because I want to fuck up.
Now, 90 seconds in. No, we're good. 90 seconds in, drop the F-bomb, hold it back.
All right, I'm doing good, man. Excited. Let's dive into it.
We got a jam pack. We're going to kick things off in just a moment with news and notes. We're going to be joined by Joe Consorti from the Bitcoin Layer to talk all things macro, as well as a new little time value of lightning paper that he wrote. And then, of course, we have the Bitcoin Magazine Pro dynamic duo of Dylan and Sam joining us for the last hour today. But let's dive into it with some news and notes. So this was a story that I found over the weekend, and I found it to be very, very interesting. Nothing to do with Bitcoin on paper, but bear with me now. The Reserve Bank of Australia has hired an independent research team to determine how much their central banks played a role in the ongoing recession. This is significant because Australia was just doing exactly what the US Fed and the ECB were doing. This report will be more than a reflection on Australia, but rather the entire central banking policies over the last 2 years. Mind you, this independent inquiry will be done by 2 Australian economists plus an ex-deputy governor of the Bank of Canada, who is currently an external member to the Financial Policy Committee of the Bank of England. Look, this is a lot of bankers are going to be paying close attention to this because this could be the first sign that the bankers are actually at fault with what we're seeing and dealing with, despite their rhetoric. Another very interesting thing out of Australia was the fact that their governor, the Reserve Bank of Australia's governor, Philip Lowe, said that their team's forecasting was, quote, embarrassing. We should have forecast this better. We didn't, end quote. I've been calling for a lot of accountability from the central bankers, and it looks like this could be the first iteration of that. Remains to be seen as this is a developing story. General thoughts?
I don't think they're going to find fault with themselves. I think they're going to blame Putin. I think they're going to blame sanctions. I think they're going to blame coronavirus. This is it's like, I find audits so funny when you pay a company to come and check your books. Like if you were tear them apart, like my old job, 2 jobs ago, I used to be in compliance. And it's you hire the auditor and they're tough, but it's kind of like a tough love. It's like, hey man, you really need to improve this, but we're still going to give you a B+. It's just it's still a good grade, a B+. It's not excellent, but it's they're not going to hate you with everything they got, because then you're never going to hire them again. You need these audits are meant for companies to make themselves look good. So at the end of the day, they're going to be hey guys, maybe you printed a little bit of money, but really it's not your fault. It's Corona, it's Putin, it's X, Y, and Z thing. I don't know. That's just what I think is going to be. P, you want to chime in here?
You fucking nailed it. There's really 2 outcomes here. And I agree with everything you just said. I was on the software engineering side of that. So with audits, they go exactly as you specified. You are paying the person to come to a conclusion that supports your interests. So when you're doing audits where you're actually trying to improve things, they'll be harsher. And when you're doing audits, they're going to be released publicly. They're way, way easier. So there's 2 things that are happening here. One is the Reserve Bank of Australia is we fucked up so badly that we have to, shit that we don't even know about yet, that they're we have to basically have a smoke screen of doing due diligence, right? And then later it's going to come out, or there's going to be some weird, way that plays out. Or number 2 is they are going to use this as a way to shift blame onto either other central banks, or they're going to come to a conclusion that's as you said, it's going to be we didn't do anything wrong, or we did the best we could. And that's going to make them look better. So I think regardless, it will be an interesting outcome, but I do not see a world where they come to the conclusion we fucked everything up. They're already sort of smearing the blame, it sounds where they're basically saying it's all central banks. It's not just us. Don't be angry.
Well, so to clarify, no one has come out to draw that conclusion other than myself, the Financial Times, and Stockwit's daily report, which I originally read this story from.
Just the Financial Times?
Just the Financial Times. So Australia itself has not come out to say that, but I think the second point that you made, P, is far more likely here, where rather than you have 2 Australians and a Canadian/Brit on this inquiry committee. So no, you have 2 out of 3 people who are Australian already on the committee, it's going to be fully biased. I agree with that sentiment. I do, however, think this is the smoke screen to start pointing the finger at other central bankers and say, hey, we just did what you guys told us to do. And you know where else did exactly what they were told to do?
Oh God, if you say Nazi Germany, I'm going to lose my mind.
No.
Okay.
It's like from 2022, a story that we've talked about on this show, but this is exactly what happened to Sri Lanka.
Oh, yeah.
Listened to the IMF, they did everything that they were told to do, and then lo and behold, they actually couldn't handle that. So you guys are both right. The inquiry is going to be way too biased, but it will be interesting if it still comes out and points the finger at ECBs or at the ECB or at the Fed, because now it's starting to say, hey, like, you guys are having a far greater impact, your decisions do, on the entire global economy, more so than you realize, even though you guys are literally entrusted with the entire global fucking economy, but no one seems to know how to run it.
Q, I think you're right. I think they might point at other ones, but it's kind of one of those things that, like, they're also their friends or partners that when they're looking for money, who do they go to? The ECB or the Federal Reserve, outside of the IMF. So they might be like, they're going to like disguise it in language that, like, due to the strengthening conditions of the US dollar, like, that's what caused, like, these, like, without saying they printed too much money, they're going to say the US dollar strengthened too much relative to the global economy, is what I think. It's like a nice way of saying, like, you guys screwed us, but not saying like the US screwed us, if that makes sense.
Let me pose this question and then we'll move on to the next story. But do you think if this report, if the report actually says, hey, the policies of the ECB, the policies of the Federal Reserve really hampered us and they were the root cause of all of this, do you think Australia maybe does the courtesy of giving Jerome Powell or Christine Lagarde a quick phone call to say, hey, our research shows this, it gets published tomorrow, goodbye? Or do they just bury it? What does that dynamic look like?
100% they give them a heads up, I think.
I mean, look, like, everybody knows what's actually going on here. Like, if they were like, hey, we've done a couple $1 million worth of research and we have found, Jerome Powell's going to be like, why the fuck did you spend a couple $1 million? We all know what happened here. We all know why this actually happened. Like, you should have saved that fucking money and done whatever you're going to do anyway. So, like, they already know what's going on. I think you are right, though, that they are probably going to give people a heads up. But none of us have any idea how those channels specifically work. But none of these things happen in isolation, right? To your point earlier, Q, like, all of these central banks are deeply incestuously involved with each other. The idea that these countries can basically maintain their own, like, economic sovereignty is hilarious, right? Like that is a fiction that none of us on the show believe, and most people, I think, who listen to this don't believe. But that's a fiction that is, basically propagated by all these central banks that everyone has a deeply vested interest in continuing to promote. But the reality is, all of our economies are so intertangled at this point that we're all just marching to the same tune. And right now, a significant aspect of that tune is, decided by the ECB and also by, the United States Federal Reserve. But we're all in the same boat together.
I think that puts a nice bow on it. All right, so we're moving on to the next story now. So Zipmex, it is an exchange out of Asia, is currently going to allow their users some ease. So they say they will allow users to partially withdraw Bitcoin and Ether from their trading accounts starting later this week. Back in July, they actually halted all withdrawals for their customers, kind of like because of all the contagion of Celsius, Voyager, all these different ones. They had a ton of exposure to Babel Finance. It's probably one of the largest exchanges in Asia. And similar kind of thing where they lent a bunch of money to Babel and basically people were panicking and withdrawing from their things. It was very funny, though. In the article, they said they will only partially allow their users to withdraw. So imagine you're like trying to withdraw. Let's just say you have 10 Bitcoin on there. Just go crazy. Let's just say you have 10 Bitcoin on there. You didn't self-custody it. Imagine they're like, we only let you take 2 of the 10 Bitcoin off the exchange. It remains to be seen. It says that withdrawals will be allowed from August 11th through the 16th, which is even funnier. So, like, what happens on August 16th? It's like, we lock this shit back down. So, like, what we've been saying, not financial advice, but get your Bitcoin off exchanges into your own self-custody and make sure that you're doing good self-custody practices. That's just my advice. That is not reflected of Bitcoin Magazine and not considered financial advice. So, guys, what are your thoughts on that?
First of all,
Chris gave a lot of financial advice right there.
I feel like I should touch my headphone and be like, I'm getting a breaking update. I'm hearing that my audio might be out of sync. If it is, please post in the chat and be like, P, your audio's fucked. If not, be like, P, your audio's good. We'll figure that out. Yeah, I mean, fuck these people. It's the it is the funds that people have deposited into these accounts. Like, you should absolutely be able to take it out. And the idea that they're like, it's going to be framed as like, we're here fighting for you. We're the good guys here. God, these crazy situations that we don't have any control over are the things that are preventing you from being able to pull your money out, and we're just keeping it here to try to protect you, the user. That's total horseshit. What's actually happening, of course, is they are desperately trying to maintain control of the liquidity that they desperately need in order to, hopefully for them, not for you, avoid declaring bankruptcy. So the idea that they're going to portray it as like, oh yeah, like we're fighting the good fight. You can, withdraw, 20% or 30% or 60% of your funds. Like, it's fucking ridiculous. You should never be in that situation in the first place. It's fucked.
You guys said it all. I'll just say everyone should subscribe to the channel down below. And I promise you, once you press subscribe, that's when P's audio gets fixed.
All right. I'll be back. I'm going to leave, come back, and then hopefully it'll be fixed. You tell me.
All right. We're going to buy some time here, Q.
That sucks because P, you had the next story.
The next two stories.
Fuck. All right. Hold on. Roll the tape. Nobody can hear me saying this, right? Like, keep going. Keep the spool going. Just, I'll be back.
All right. We're going to skip your stories for right now. The U.S. government passes a $1.5 billion bill to subsidy Bitcoin mining. This is directed more towards oil and gas. This is passed through by Senate Environment and Public Works Chair Thomas Carper, Democrat out of Delaware, a new methane emissions reduction program that would reward oil and gas companies that slash their emissions of methane and penalize those that don't. If only Bitcoin solved this problem. That was it. No, take me off the camera. The wink was it, bro. Come on.
All right.
I slipped the button to bring you off the full screen. No, I think this is very interesting. Q, I think you noted as well that like it was from a Democratic senator. I know it kind of seems to be this left-right attack. We do not believe that here at Bitcoin Magazine. Bitcoin is for everyone, no matter your color, race, creed, or religion, or even your political affiliation. So very interesting. I guess I wonder how they're going to make it up, because now like we gave more aid to Ukraine. They're trying to do this inflationary act, or the inflationary act. Did Biden sign it yet? Or I know it was going to go to his desk.
It still has to go to the House.
Oh, it has to go to the House. Okay.
Has to go to the House.
In September. That's when it's going to go.
I believe so. Yeah. I mean, look, why do we need to be around the bush of the question that we know the answer to? How do they get this money? Press a button and all of a sudden, poof, they've added a zero to their balance sheet. If only I had that button for my bank account. Like, oh my goodness, it would be truly remarkable.
How many zeros do you need to be okay, Q? Like 8 zeros, like 7 zeros?
I had like more. I need more zeros to like comfortably say that I never want to work again.
I thought we were talking about debt, and I was going to say, like, I love the idea that, Q has more than like 10K of debt, or that he's so rich that he's like, I've got the debt of an entire country. Also, let me know how my audio is. If it's still bad, fuck you. I'm gonna tie us all the way back. So there is a Singaporean exchange. I fucking butchered that. I don't know what the actual correct term is, but you get the idea. Called hodlnot.com. No relation to our very own deeply cherished hodlnot. That again apparently it's very large in Singapore. They are yet another exchange that's like, dear users, we are halting withdrawals for your own safety because we love you. Not because of our bad decisions, but because we love you and we want to protect you from yourselves. Again, this is just another pin in the long line of exchanges that are taking advantage of the people that have been custodying Bitcoin with them. If you don't hold your own keys, you do not own your own Bitcoin. Not your keys, not your coin. Learn how to take control of your own financial future. Next story, Wallet of Satoshi, an awesome custodial Lightning wallet. So when we're talking about the Lightning Network, you can have wallets that are where you hold custody of the funds that you are using in the Lightning Network, like Blixt is one, Zeus wallet is another one, or you can have wallets where basically they are custodying your funds for you. And one of the best ones in that regard is Wallet of Satoshi. They recently announced that they are over 4 million Lightning payments on their platform. And the interesting thing about this is just the rate of increase of Lightning payments. So again, this is just on Wallet of Satoshi, but it took 801 days to get from zero to 1 million Lightning payments on their platform. It took only 204 days to get from 1 to 2 million Lightning payments on their platform. It took only 176 days to get from 2 million to 3 million, and only 131 days to get from 3 to 4 million. So the rate of adoption of the Lightning Network is continuing to increase dramatically, and that's an exciting thing.
Yeah, P, I think that's a really important point too. So that's just 4 million on Wallet of Satoshi alone. That I think it happened yesterday or 2 days ago. But very, very interesting. But it also remains to be seen, like, this is not including the whole Lightning Network. So there's quite literally, if I had to guess, like hundreds of millions of transactions that have occurred across all different implementations, whether on computer, hot wallets on your phone. I would say hot wallets would probably be the most common. I know Blue Wallet and Moon Wallet, MUUM, are two that I really like and use. But yeah, it's very, very interesting. And also, yeah, like I said, Zeus Wallet as well, or Lightning Zeus Wallet. I forget what the Zeus is what I call it, but I forget what the actual name of it is in the App Store. I think it's Zeus LN, right?
I think you're right. I want to be clear. All Lightning wallets are technically hot wallets because you have to be connected to the to the network in order to route payments or accept or send payments. But yeah, I take your meaning. It's exciting stuff. Lightning Network is growing in adoption every fucking day.
Yeah. Okay. Now we are moving on to
Wait, real quick. I want to correct something. To answer the question by Geek Hawk, the Inflation Reduction Act, the House is going to vote on this on Friday. So keep an eye out. We'll see. We'll have more info on that by the end of this week. All right. Now moving on to the next stuff.
All right, moving on to attacks on privacy. So right now we have 3 stories that are very joined together, and basically it is an attack on an individual person's right to privacy. So currently, the owner of the no KYC exchange BTC-E extradited to the U.S. After more than 5 years of litigation, Russian national Alexander Vinnik was extradited from Greece yesterday. He currently runs, like I said, the exchange BTC-E, and it is an exchange that was not requiring KYC. I believe it remains to be seen, but basically this was not available to U.S. citizens because obviously the U.S. has some of the strictest financial regulations requiring KYC and AML laws to be enacted for it. He's operating an exchange that was abroad, but the claws of the United States government want to make sure that they have the world KYC'd, and they want the power and the control when it comes to money in general. So that it's sad to see that this is the case. I didn't know Alexander Vinnik at all, but it seems like an attack on our individual right to privacy. So I guess, P, do you want to hit us up with the next story as well?
Obviously. It pains me greatly to mention the name of the shitcoin from which all their shitcoins are born into the world. But the U.S. Treasury has sanctioned Tornado Cash, which, as I understand it, is it's an Ethereum-based equivalent of Whirlpool, or CoinJoin implementation, so to speak. And though I'm sure it's literally just like people in little white uniforms, like manually moving Ethereum transactions behind the scenes, even though it's presented as a super effective system. Regardless, the U.S. Treasury announced this morning that it has sanctioned the use of the non-custodial Ethereum mixer through the blacklisting of various addresses. The conclusion here is even if you just hold Bitcoin and you are using mixing services that are much more privacy focused and effective, like Samurai Whirlpool, you need to pay attention to this because, Ethereum is already broken. It is easier for them to potentially sanction these types of things. But this is just the beginning of the war on privacy that we're going to see in the near future. So Tornado Cash is, as I understand it, pretty big. And so they're going after this first, but be ready and educate yourself on how to maintain your right to privacy and specifically your right to financial privacy, because the idea that if you don't have anything to hide, you shouldn't be worried is absolute horseshit, as I hope you all understand at this point, right? It's not about whether or not you are a criminal. That frame, the idea that only criminals need privacy, is something that they spoon feed as many people as they can so that they will accept Orwellian surveillance systems. Because once you are being surveilled effectively, then they get to decide who is a bad person and who is not. And as soon as you rise above a certain threshold, once they have that metadata, once they have that information about you, they use it against you. As we saw with the Canadian truckers, it becomes, they will basically just change the rules in real time in order to suit their own needs. Do not put yourself in a position or allow yourself to be put in a position where you are susceptible to that kind of attack.
Yeah, and it's not even just they will change the rules. They will retroactively change the rules. Like, it was not illegal to donate, and then it's like they went retroactively to attack people, which is crazy when you really think about how the judicial system works. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if we've ever had a law where it's changed and then like, oh, now we're retroactively going after people before. Maybe it has occurred, but this is at least the biggest one in most recent memory.
I'm trying.
You got the next story. Hit us with it.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think of a law. But the story is more like to build off of these two. This is an older story from about a month ago, near and dear to my heart, as many of you would probably assume. Binance got in a lot of hot water about a month ago because it was found that they were still servicing clients out of Iran. Iran, for anyone who doesn't realize it for whatever reason, is back under sanctions as of 2018. I just think it's really interesting that these people people out of Iran have been using Binance for the better part of 4 years, while technically illegal. And only when Binance started releasing statements saying we comply fully with the U.S. sanctions in regards to the sanctions that were then put on Russia, only to have this come up. So let it be known, does not matter who you are, what you like to do. If the U.S. doesn't like you, they're going to come for you in any way, shape, or form. I'm still going to, Chris, try to figure out an answer to your question.
I'm sure there is one. It's the only one in my recent memory. I'm sure there's definitely things like, hey, like we're going after you retroactively. But yeah, none that I can think of off the top of my head. Q's now going to think real hard about this too.
Wait, it's definitely happened. Like, I mean, we can go and find specific examples of this, but I can even imagine a frame where it sounds very reasonable, right? They're like, oh my gosh, it turns out that this one specific type of transaction or people who were buying stuff from this specific place, they were all criminals and they were terrorists and they are responsible for this false flag operation. And then basically it's like, everybody's like, of course we need to go back and retroactively sanction those people and put them in jail and, attach their testicles to car batteries. Like, obviously, right? That's how that goes down. So there may not be one that you can think of, but, and I agree with you under the idea that like this is how public this was, but I think retroactive
he thinks there's been a bunch of people that got black bagged, like oh, like they're doing this black bag, never see them again. I was thinking, like, imagine like you were on Silk Road for like normal things. You're like, hey man, I was just trying to buy like Pokemon cards off Silk Road.
Shut the fuck up! You were not on Silk Road to buy Pokemon cards.
No. How funny would be like, no, I'm just like a gardener. I couldn't get these into the country because like they're like seeds from Cuba.
I got some dark shit to admit to you guys. I may or may not have bought some really cool Pogs off of Silk Road. I don't know if you guys ever played Pogs, but it was like you had your slammers.
I did not.
I thought that shit. I thought you meant the NSFW Pogs.
Oh no, I have never. I'm assaulted.
Which, by the way, I just need fully disclose that
POGS. Jesus,
we're definitely going to get canceled today.
Oh my god, this is unacceptable. Another piece of information that I found really interesting, reported by No Bullshit Bitcoin, which again is a fantastic source of Bitcoin-related news, one of my favorites. They posted that SMS service provider Twilio was compromised. They point out that Twilio handles communications for 150,000 plus corporate clients, including Facebook and Uber. And data collected by Twilio includes addresses, payment details, IP addresses, and in some cases, proof of identity. That was recently, there was a customer breach and a lot of information was put out into the wild. We talked about this many times before, but the main problem with allowing your data to be collected is not that the people that are collecting it necessarily are going to do bad things with it, though that is a concern. The biggest issue is that it creates this honeypot. It creates a centralized store of information that hackers are, and governments, right? Hackers are sort of like, when you think of hacker, you think of like shadowy cabal living in their mother's basement, as Q does, trying to steal information. The reality is the a lot of these hacks are perpetrated by much larger entities. And so whenever you allow your data to be collected, you create this honeypot, which then eventually, people are heavily incentivized to hack, steal that data, sell it on the dark web. And the problem is that this data can all be aggregated. So once there is a comprehensive data set, you start to be able to extrapolate and basically link identities across multiple data breaches and form a really, really comprehensive picture of someone. And that's a really big fucking problem.
I'm going to go to the next story.
I wasn't done. Really big. I'm kidding. Keep going.
So, shout out Pedro McCormick, also known as McLasso himself. There was a sign that was going around Twitter, and it turns out banks over in the UK are starting to have a limit to cash withdrawals. And there's some interesting pieces of language, and I think we have it up on the screen in a very. I'm going to try to read some of these lines to you, but feel free to come back, press pause, and come back and read this fully.
It's fucking terrifying.
This will include asking you questions about the purpose of your cash withdrawal. We may also ask for supporting documentation such as an invoice. This helps us validate the withdrawal is genuine and protect you against fraud and scams. Okay. Please note that it's advisable to give 24 hours notice on large cash withdrawals amounts over £2,000, or if you would like specific denominations. You can pre-advise this for your transactions via customer account, blah, 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 blah. I cannot fucking believe it's 2022 and I'm being told whether or not, like, full disclosure, this does not affect me. I do not live in London. I live in the greatest country in the world, America. And like, this is a developed country. This isn't like Iran, my homeland. This isn't somewhere in the middle of South America or Africa or some island nation somewhere. This is in the middle of fucking London, in the middle of England, telling you you can only withdraw up to £2,000, and even that can be put under question.
Wait, was this England or was this Australia?
England,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's fucking terrifying. The idea, even like the frame itself is very, very disconcerting, that as a person who has put money into a bank that you have earned, that you do not actually have the ability to take it out when you want, for whatever fucking reason you want. And we see that already in the United States. We see that starting to happen, but the specific amounts that are listed here and just the kind of like, oh yeah, this is just a totally normal thing, is very disconcerting. It's coming. Prepare yourselves. Make yourself ungovernable.
To be honest, like, stuff like this makes me more and more, and not financial advice, this is just my own appetite. I am becoming far less inclined to hold my money in banks.
Wait. Like, are you saying you shifted from like, you were like, a pro bank bull to like, now you're not, or you're saying like, just like even like small amounts, like contextualize this? Like
even small, like I still operate under a pay me in fiat, and I will do with that as I see fit.
For sure.
As that just for me makes my life a little easier to operate with how much money is owed in a lot of different places. I can't afford.
You just admitted that he's a broke man.
Blink if they're holding you hostage right now. Q.
Yeah, by blinking hard enough.
By being held hostage, you mean student loans.
But also like I'm disincentivized to even look at my 401k. I'm disincentivized to look at my IRA because it takes something as simple as one policy decision to now the goalpost of, oh, when you're 65, you can access these accounts. Actually, you know what? Your generation, you can't access it if you're born in 1990 until you're 75 years old. Like, bitch, I'm barely going to make it to 50. Fuck no.
That's 100% going to happen as well, by the way. I know that was just like an off-the-cuff example, but they are definitely 100%. Going, yeah.
Like,
that's so infuriating.
I'll put one little caveat, like the Peter Thiel thing. Like, he put $2,000 of his PayPal like pre-IPO stock when he was like helping found PayPal at like $2,000 equivalent, and it grew to $5 billion. I mean, he's the founder. It was worth like nothing when he started, but now they're trying to like get him to withdraw and like tax him if he doesn't take out 50% of it year after year, which is like
Chris, he did not just deposit $2,000 in that account. He deposited $2,000 every year in that account. And there are reports.
Okay.
There are reports that he was over depositing. There's a limit in your Roth IRA of $5,500 a year.
I can't believe you're defending this.
No,
that may be true. That may be true.
I'm not defending it. He was over depositing in the account.
Well, okay, wait. That may be true, but then the solution to that is you get penalized, you pay your fee, you pay your fines, and then you're good to go. That is whether or not he was over depositing in his account is a separate issue from the core of it, which is the government does not like that he was able to put whatever the acceptable amount is in stock in Palantir. He then grew Palantir to the size that it is. By the way, Palantir is the evil orb from fucking Lord of the Rings. So if you don't know that, look up your shit. He literally named his company like, I am evil and I will suck all your data into my genitals. That's what it's about. And they don't like that he now has this tax advantage, like giant lump of cash, which you are supposed to be able to have. That's the whole fucking premise of a tax advantage retirement account. And they're like, yeah, but we're going to change the rules because we don't like them anymore. That's what's happening here. But we're now at 2 minutes.
Yes
over.
And no. Yes and no.
Come on. I mean,
yes and no.
You realize that your argument can be 100% like brought back.
It's going to be used on Bitcoiners. It's going to be used on Bitcoiners.
Why are you defending it?
I'm not. I'm just simply pointing out he didn't just deposit $2,000. And
he likes to eat babies. You just heard it. You just heard him say it.
There you go. Like that little conflation changes the story immensely. So that's why I push back and say like he didn't just deposit $2,000. It was a very consistent $2,000 above the minimum amount every single year.
Okay.
He was moving money into that account. Like
there are a lot of ways of doing that in a way that is. By the way, I want to be clear. I have no idea what the fuck he was doing. This is the first I'm hearing of the $2,000 over. My point is, and I would absolutely expect him to be pushing that boundary as much as possible. As it,
I'll let this die. On a mission now to bring down Peter Thiel.
I think we got to bring Joe Consorti in here. He's been waiting in the waiting room patiently.
All right. We've been told that Joe's internet is better this time. Last time he was here, he was just dropping knowledge bombs left, right, and center, and then also his internet was trash. And I personally resented it because I wanted to hear the information and I was not able to. Apparently, it's fixed.
I heard it's powered by Red Bull now, so if they want to sponsor us.
So long as everyone brought their tomatoes, so that in the event it doesn't work, we're all gonna go to Joe's house and just throw tomatoes at him.
We don't know where he lives, and we shouldn't. So really, it's gonna be you can throw tomatoes at your own screen, and we will not pay for replacements.
I don't want people to realize that they're just gonna throw tomatoes at their own computer. Why, P? Why? Before we go, I want to remind everyone: get your tickets to Bitcoin Amsterdam. Use promo code BMLive. Get 10% off of that. It's the only way the children, us three, the mirroring of this doesn't work, but the three of us can't exist
without... Is P a child? He's really an old man, but a young soul.
I mean, P is so old.
It's true.
Did you guys know that P hazed Charlie Munger in college?
That's right. Keep talking, though, so I can do the air horn noise.
So yeah, buy your tickets to Bitcoin Amsterdam because otherwise they're going to stop feeding the kids and you don't want us to not be fed because Chris goes first and then I go and then P.
We've already drawn up the order, yeah.
Pretty much.
Gross. All right, cut to commercial. We'll be back in just a minute with Joe Consorti.
What is up, guys? And thank you for sticking through that commercial break. We are joined by none other than the man who does research over at the Bitcoin Layer, my fellow attic dweller at his mother's house, but currently coming to us live from the 7-Eleven internet provided to him for free for his slushy, Joe Consorti. What is up, man?
That was a long intro. Wow.
And you're muted.
Thanks for having me. Oh,
fuck, no.
What?
You don't have that lag? All right, we're gonna go for a little bit, but throw it in the
what?
chat if you're getting that lag from Joe. You see it now too.
We're chilling. We're chilling. Crystal's getting good. Hey, can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you okay now.
Okay, fantastic.
We're gonna go, but honestly, for our audience, this is the moment that we told you to be prepared for. Have those tomatoes on hand, and feel free to just chuck them at Joe.
We have Pickles 4K, which is better than Pickles.
He's saying I'm fine, bro.
Yeah, Pickles 4K is saying that Joe is in tune and on time. Q, I think the space cakes you ate in preparation for Amsterdam, they're hitting it. They're affecting you right now. Just stay cool.
Dude,
Joe and I are here for you. We're going to talk about
the
larger economic environment, and we're going to be okay.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah. So as P-Metric, we're going to do a nice, fun little macro update with you. But first, if I can find what I find far more interesting is you and Nick went down the rabbit hole of, oh my God, why can I the time value of the Lightning Network? So I'll let you set the stage of like what it is you guys are trying to figure out here and why, because this was awesome.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah. So to back way up, like 2018, before I was even into Bitcoin, actually right around the time that I got this shirt, I think, was Nick originally published a series of Medium articles before he did Layered Money, before all of that, that were talking about basically like a Bitcoin capital market that could have been made possible through a reference rate, right? You know, an interest rate that is, you know, derived that other, you know, entities use to borrow and lend against, and the one that was derived through the Lightning Network, right? Parking your liquidity in a channel and then earning a rate of return on that. And if some way we could widely report a rate of return that you can capture from a Lightning channel, then that could be used as a reference rate, right? People could take a look at that and say, okay, I'm going to lend to you because, you know, your credit history isn't as great as another guy at, you know, a higher spread to, let's say, you know, the United States government, right? And that's sort of the idea that Nick set forth in 2018. Since then, a lot has changed, especially in the Lightning Network landscape, where now not only do we have an example of a widely published interest rate, which is on Magma, which is basically a Lightning liquidity marketplace, but it also opens up the floodgates for a Lightning Network derived yield curve. Because the cool thing about this marketplace, not to get too far ahead before I'm just setting the stage here. Basically, on this liquidity marketplace, you can lease channel liquidity for a predetermined period of time. Now, what a yield curve is, you're plotting different maturities of a fixed income instrument like a U.S. Treasury through time, right? You're plotting them again, you know, basically through time, and then all their yields. And obviously through time, it's more risky. You're exposed to higher interest rate risk. And so a higher return on your capital is demanded. And so basically on a yield curve, you know, let's say a 3-month US Treasury is what? It's, you know, 2.5% right now versus a 30-year, which would demand a higher interest rate. That's the idea that wasn't possible in the Lightning Network, because you could pull channel liquidity from any channel at any time. And so like standardizing a contract or standardizing, okay, if you park your money here for this amount of time, here's what you'll get, was impossible. But with Magma, they have basically minimum lease times where you could take, now there's a time attached to an interest rate, right? And that could open the floodgates to something like a Lightning derived yield curve. Now, why this is important is because, and I promise I'll stop rambling, but this is sort of the kicker, is because there are $900 trillion of liquidity, global asset value, right? And you know, with Bitcoin right now, having a widely published interest rate is one thing, but having a yield curve and showing market participants who have hundreds of millions, billions of dollars that they can park their liquidity inside a Lightning channel for a given period of time and earn a set rate, that's huge, right? In terms of attracting market participants and making the Lightning Network something that's more efficient, pushing Bitcoin towards more so global capital market status, right? We're not at the same level as something like United States dollar denominated bonds, right? It's something like $10 trillion in those versus 10 million or something like that in the Lightning Network. I could be off, but it's two nice round numbers. But needless to say, the Lightning Network needs basically a widely reported reference rate, so market participants can see that they can park their liquidity in a Lightning channel or on something like leasing out their liquidity, and they can earn a yield on that. They can, for corporate financing or what have you, that incurs less overall risk profile than something like a corporate bond, right? So that's basically the first half of the time value of Lightning Network. Those are sort of the advancements towards a widely published interest rate that we've seen in the last 4 years. That was the idea behind writing it, and yeah, now I'm excited to chat more about it.
Cool. Let's unpack that because there's a lot there to unpack. And first, I want to attack this a little bit. It feels to me there's a degree in which you are reintroducing almost a credit rating system by showing which channels are more creditworthy than others. Why? Why do we need this, and why? And what is the ultimate goal in introducing or reintroducing this credit rating system now into the Bitcoin system?
Good question.
Sorry. Is this about channels or about nodes?
Channels, because that's where that's where you park liquidity. I mean, individual node operators can run several channels. So I guess in theory, you would basically have like a reputation profile based on an individual node. Instead of like a channel's history. One quick correction real quick before I dive into that answer, because it's a really good question. There's actually $100 million in the Lightning Network and $100 trillion in dollar denominated bonds and equities. So just to make that clear for listeners, if they thought either of those numbers were wicked low. But there is basically in any form of lending, lenders need to know the risk profile of the person they're lending to. And obviously in something like Bitcoin, everybody's equal on the base layer. But when you get into actual, lending of liquidity, and this can be done in a far lower overall aggregate risk profile than something like a corporate bond, right? You incur a lot of counterparty risk when you have, when you're lending to a corporation. You incur far less counterparty risk. Let's say, you set up Lightning, in a channel. Or you're lending in multi-sig or any of these different things. Bitcoin as a whole, the Bitcoin and Lightning networks together, they incur less overall risk than the traditional, United States dollar capital market. So basically, a risk curve is necessary for lenders to see, okay, I can incur, I can get, let's say 3.5%, 4% if I lend to somebody off chain, because that's obviously the riskiest you could possibly do, is completely off the Bitcoin network. Or I could earn 3%, right? You're sacrificing 1.5%, but you're doing this Lightning channel liquidity lease, which incurs, no default risk because you could close the channel at any time. Obviously you incur risks native to the Lightning network, hot wallet risk, all these other things. But as a whole, you're not lending to a corporation where, somebody may not want to buy your bond on a secondary market and you're stuck with something that's plummeting in value. You can't resell and you're getting barely any coupon off of it. So as a whole, that's the idea. I mean, we talk about, in Bitcoin, people are perceived as equal. Literally anybody can use the base chain to transact with one another. But when it gets into, borrowing and lending for financing, just like a traditional capital market, there does have to be some form of assessing risk profiles of different market participants in order for it to flourish.
So I apologize. I have not looked into this in depth yet, but I'm still kind of hung up on the idea of why are we talking about specific channels versus like nodes as a whole? And I guess, are these analyses is part of the kind of analysis compared to the risk of just a normal Lightning channel opening? Like how does that work?
Yeah, so I could be conflating the language there, but the reason I'm sort of interchanging the two is because it varies, right? At the bottom of your risk curve, you have cold storage Bitcoin, and then you have something like the Lightning Network reference rate, which is derived entirely at the node level. Nodes have to report the rate of return that they capture on their channel, and that's theoretical. That hasn't happened yet.
Got it. Okay.
At least widely and reported. Yeah. And then, the further you move up the curve, the reason I'm using the channel language is because on Magma, on this channel liquidity marketplace, that's what you're actually leasing from somebody. You're leasing not a node, but
a specific channel. Yeah, no, totally.
Runs.
That absolutely makes sense.
Before we dive into the magma of it, though, I want to spend some time on sort of the risk return curve that you guys introduced. I think, though, what I want to really get a better sense of is sort of let's talk this out. So we have on the risk return curve what you guys have sort of created. Talk to us about sort of what is the least risky to the most risky, and let's on each one of these sort of stop and explore them before just everything. Go.
For sure. I love it. Oh, and before we dive into it, by the way, this is not Monster Energy. This is water. Just for you, Keith.
I hate you so much.
No,
I'll be completely honest, dude. Like, I showed up to the office at Bitcoin Magazine HQ, and the refrigerator is full of yerba mate, whatever, because I guess Dylan LeClair has infested Duke's freaking mind, as well as all these damn Red Bulls and all the LaCroix, whatever the hell, however you pronounce it. I like making fun of it. So I just want a Gatorade, man. Give me my sugar and water.
Dude, Gatorades are way too filling. This gets you yelling. Anyway, this is an absolute classic. Yerba mates too. Up in Vermont, that's like what everybody, at least 3 or 4 of those every single day. Not me.
I hear Dylan LeClair is just like the yerba mate, just dealer up in Vermont. Like, it all funnels through him. He buys cases of it at a time. Then he's the main point of distribution. True or false?
Good Lord. I did see a pretty big fridge last I went to his last apartment. So won't verify, won't deny, but wouldn't be off the table, I guess. So yeah, with this risk curve, basically the first point, the point at the very, very bottom, the reason that it's here, and again, for people who are wondering what we're talking about, a risk curve is a way of illustrating the risk of different vehicles to park your wealth in a capital market. And as we go up this risk curve, I'll explain what the equivalent is to today's capital, United States dollar equivalent. So at the very bottom, you have the and it's a way, basically the way you do this is you plot the risk of an instrument versus the return. Risk on the x-axis, return on the y-axis. And as you move up, you have diminishing marginal returns. You take on an outsized amount of risk for slightly more amount of return. And so at the very bottom, you've got cold storage Bitcoin, right, which is non-yielding, right? You don't earn any native yield on your Bitcoin if you're holding it in cold storage. It's non-custodial, right, if you're holding it on your own. And it is counterparty free, right? It's an asset that isn't somebody else's liability, which is really what you want in your money. Oh, fantastic. We got the, I love the screenshot app on Windows. You can pull those up really quickly. But yeah, as you can see here at the very, very bottom, and P or Q, if you want to pull up the second version of the graphic too, that one's a little bit more detailed. It's about 3/4 of the way down, but we'll talk about this one for now. So cold storage Bitcoin is non-yielding, non-custodial, right? And it's counterparty free. So no default risk with cold storage Bitcoin, right? Could it be in that safe directly behind me? Of course not. That's just to throw people off. So my live appearances, they think if I break into Joe's office, I can steal all his Bitcoin, but it's not really in there. That's a farce. And so you don't have counterparty risk, right? And you don't have custodial risk. This is exactly the same as physical gold in its risk profile, based on its risk profile, right? A lot of people don't like to make the analogy. A lot of people do like to make the analogy when introducing people, and it's helpful here as well, because if we think of physical gold, really, again, it has the lowest overall risk profile. The next thing up on the rung for, a United States dollar risk curve would be a United States Treasury. And of course, we've never defaulted on our debt in a major way. If you lend to the United States government, they're not going to explicitly default on you. They'll implicitly default on you through printing into oblivion, but they won't explicitly default on you. And so with something like the United States Treasury, you still have a slightly higher risk than with physical gold. So cold storage Bitcoin incurs the lowest overall risk profile, just like physical gold does. And basically, plotting these against one another and sort of showing the equivalent in the United States dollar capital market was just to sort of B it so people could more easily understand. But yeah, that's the first point on the risk curve.
So
can I ask?
Go ahead.
I just want to jump in and ask, when we talk about the Lightning Network reference rate, one of the things that immediately occurs to me is that the specific strategy that one uses when one is creating channels and basically managing liquidity across time has a massive, massive effect on what your return per channel is. So this is basically just an average across all existing Lightning networks. Is that correct?
So yeah, in theory, that's what it would entail. Basically what it would be is nodes would volunteer their information. So nodes would volunteer their APR, and then that would all get aggregated and averaged. The way you would do this is still up for debate, right? There's nothing like this in practice. Through time, I anticipate that this will come about. It's actually odd. We got the next rung up the risk curve before we got the Lightning Network reference rate. So we have like a Lightning adjacent reference rate that is derived from leasing channel liquidity, but we don't have one that's actually aggregated from like native node data. That would require, external coordination and then, aggregation and publishing by some entity, whether it be like a group, some sort of cabal of nodes. That's essentially what the LNRR would look like in theory. And again, like the reason we keep writing about this and the reason I made it a point to include in here is because one day that's going to be pretty major. LNRR, we tend to think of sort of the equivalent to the United States Treasury, like almost risk-free. It's called risk-free. It's what people use as their primary reference rate, but it's not exactly risk-free, right? Unlike physical gold and cold storage Bitcoin.
So let's define what these risks are in comparison to the cold storage, as well as what then are the greater opportunities for return. Because as in the previous image that we just saw, the LNRR is the next sort of step up above Bitcoin and cold storage, which
I think the risks are pretty well documented. Or are you saying it's useful to our audience to basically just have those reiterated really quickly?
Probably the latter. We'll go with the latter. Yeah. So a couple of different things that are posed as a risk when you're operating a Lightning node and you have a channel or several channels. Is hot wallet risk, right? Let's say I have access to my channel and it's open on some, like the password to it, how to access it, or the node itself is open on one of my computers or my phone gets stolen, computer gets stolen or hacked into in some way. Then those funds could just immediately be swept from the channel, right? So that is one risk. There's also inactive peer risk. And forced closure risk, and both of these kind of go hand in hand. If you have an inactive peer on the Lightning Network, remember channels are between two Lightning Network participants, two Lightning Network nodes, and so if you have an inactive peer that won't settle up the channel, then your funds are locked in that channel, right? You can't settle up on the main Bitcoin blockchain, and this isn't even so much as a risk as it is like an inconvenience, because eventually, you can close out that channel. It just takes a certain amount of time. And so really the biggest risk with operating a Lightning channel to me would be hot wallet risk, right? Just that security aspect of it, not getting phished and somebody stealing your funds and sweeping the funds from the channel. That's the biggest present risk. And I'm sort of reaching when I say like inactive peer risk, forced closure risk. Those two are risks because, ultimately you get your funds back anyway. The reason, and it just goes.
Sorry to interrupt you. Could we define inactive risk? Obviously means users are not there. The counterparty is no longer there. They're no longer a part of this transaction. What was the second one you said?
Forced closure risk. So same deal. The channel just gets closed. You'd still have access to your funds, but the channel, every single one of its connections would no longer be there, which is an inconvenience, right? If you're like a big proprietor of Lightning Network channels and connections, like let's say River Financial, I'd say they're they're one of the most robust sort of entities that routes transactions. If they had like a massive string of forced channel closures, that would be not a risk to their business. They have other facets of cash flows, but it would just be a major inconvenience to their business because all these different relationships on the Lightning Network would be severed with that. So yeah, that's sort of what all of the risks are. And again, I'll say for any Lightning Network aficionados who are listening, I'm more of a traditional finance individual trying to project these sort of analogies onto the Lightning Network. I'm in no way, shape, or form a node running or channel operating expert.
If you have any issues with anything discussed, P is the person who is taking your side of these
God
arguments.
damn it.
And Joe and I are the.
I am biting the sides of my cheeks to be like, all right, like this is a rabbit hole. Do not drag us down into the technical bullshit.
We're going down a rabbit hole that people that are far more technically inclined and thoughtful most likely may not agree with a lot of things that we're discussing or even exploring here, and that's totally fair. You are entitled to not listen to this if you don't think that these are viable solutions.
No. We're trying to understand what's going on here.
Totally. I do think there's growing viability that, unfortunately, whether or not you want this to be the case, this is not something that I want. But when you see something like BlackRock's deal with Coinbase and you see Fidelity getting more involved with Bitcoin and 401ks, these traditional banking models and entities will reappear in Bitcoin, whether or not we want them to. And so there is, I think, utmost importance for us to dissect these things and really be critical of them in order to allow our voice to be the presenting sort of entity and ideas behind Bitcoin oriented financial anything. That's just otherwise it gets co-opted by the Fidelities and the BlackRocks. And then they just give us these reports and tell us this is how it's going to work now because we have the money to move the market that way.
I don't think anyone is, I'm certainly not arguing the other side.
I'm literally fighting against myself right now.
Okay, that's what I wanted to be clear.
I'm a crazy person who just fought with myself.
Because I mean, like everyone in this conversation is a super good actor. Like we're all trying to understand like how Bitcoin works ultimately, how the Lightning Network fits into that within the scope of this conversation and all that stuff. So I feel like asking the questions that Joe is asking is always a good thing. Like I think
to some degree we're all charlatans, but you're right. Yeah, Q.
Q more than any of us.
Come on now. Over time, lightning banks will emerge, because people just lack the technical wherewithal to be able to like efficiently.
Joe, you're jumping like 45 minutes into my conversation with you. Stop. Stop. I love you though. Keep going. Keep going.
Yeah. So like with these traditional entities entering Bitcoin, it is an obscene amount of liquidity. BlackRock has $10 trillion assets under management, but also they're like a huge shadow bank. And, Larry Fink's a character. I won't say anything in case, my house gets hit or whatever. But, these people aren't necessarily, of the highest moral order. But again, they do have $10 trillion assets under management. So that, a portion of that liquidity now can enter Bitcoin. And so, it's this tug of war. And, you're right. We do have to like have conversations about the implications of this stuff. So all of a sudden, we leave our Bitcoin in a hot wall and our funds get swept by Larry Fink and his goons. Got to be careful.
Not a serious question, but who would you rather be your supreme leader, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, or Larry Fink?
Okay, let's weigh the options here. I think Larry Fink, because you have like you get to play pretend that you're living freely. I get to play pretend I'm not being monitored all the time. Like even though I know for a fact that this camera is always on and recording everything I do, because the Patriot Act definitely is still a thing. We're still getting recorded all this. So like with Larry Fink, you get to play pretend like it's you're living freely. With Xi Jinping, you don't even get to play pretend. You know what I mean?
I guess. I mean, look, full disclosure, you've been DMing a Persian man way too much to not think that you are now like under legit watch by the NSA. So full disclosure.
Yeah.
Moving on to more serious stuff. So on the other side, the return. I just want to fully establish we have had this conversation on the show before our audience members who may not be fully aware. If you open up a Lightning channel, guess what? Those fees, you do get a cut of that. I mean, mind you, we also established that like in order to like really make money here, you have to be routing a lot of fees. So realistically, is this a risk reward? And let's just go around. What is the risk reward ratio here? Is this a reward profile that's worth the risk that we have established? We'll start with you, Joe.
I'd say, yeah, in the way that it currently exists, yes. If you had a whole bunch of, because the barrier to entry is lower now than it's going to be, in my opinion. Like, I believe Lightning Network, with the functionality we just discussed of widely published reference rates, paving the way for huge bank-like entities to come into the game and earn this yield, it's going to be inherently more difficult for somebody like myself who does not have trillions of dollars in all of this technical wherewithal to manage channels efficiently. So right now, I think it's a pretty attractive risk to reward profile. But as more market participants come into the Lightning Network, as you see that capacity tick up, and it becomes more enticing to run a channel, run several channels, run a node, and route these transactions optimally to capture fees, then it's going to be more difficult. It's going to be more risky for somebody like the average market participant to do something like that. I feel as of right now, though, it's pretty attractive. We're still in the very infantile stages of all of this playing out.
P, at this current level of risk reward that we're talking, do you feel like the reward profile is worth the risk of an LNRR?
I'm going to answer a slightly different question, I think, which is basically, is the risk, should one run a Lightning node? I think is what you're kind of asking.
More or less, yeah, without literally making it that.
Well, I think the reason I ask is because I think the strategy changes. Like for me, me and a bunch of people, about 20 of us got together and started PlebNet, which, grew into this large thing. I haven't been super dialed in on it lately. I don't know what the current stats are, but there was a period where like we were the single largest group that were bringing people into the Lightning Network. And when I say bringing people in, I mean like bringing plebs in, because we were just like, we want to learn how Lightning works. We want to run our own nodes. We want to understand the nitty gritty aspects of what it takes to run a Lightning node. And, when we talk about the Lightning Network overall, I kind of think of it as like, there's three different categories of users. There's like people who are like, I just want to be able to send sats fast and for no fees, or for very low fees. And for those people, like you can use Lightning today through like Blue Wallet or Moon Wallet, which is one that we recommend a lot. That's MUUN. And there, you don't have to like take custody of your Lightning channels and all that stuff. You can just basically use the Lightning Network, and it's fucking awesome. Then there's people who are like, I want to be a merchant. I want to accept funds via Lightning. I want to accept Bitcoin via Lightning. And then there's tools like Breeze Wallet lets you basically like, you have like a little point of sale system and you can take money. Again, the advantage is it's very, very rapid final settlement and the fees are very, very low. And then there's people who are like, and again, I'm talking about plebs, at the extreme end of the spectrum, who are like totally nuts and are like, I want to understand how the deep, deep nuances of this incredible life-changing technology. I want to run my own like telecom switchboard, which is basically what it means to run your own Lightning node as an individual, right? And that's super fun. And for me, it's always been really, really engaging because it's basically like a real-time strategy game. Like I used to be obsessed with StarCraft. And for me, being able to go in every morning and like check all the liquidity on all my channels and then, balance my channels through circular payments and all this other shit, that was really fun for me. But I want to be very clear that when we're talking about this stuff, you can use the Lightning Network and have no idea what's happening on the back end and just be able to have very rapid payments for basically no fees. And that works today as of right now. The reason I say all this is because I think your question was like, does it make sense to kind of like run a Lightning node right now? And I think it's very important when you're asking that question to frame it as like, are we talking about a single individual who is interested in, benefiting the Lightning Network and learning more about their own sovereignty, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Or are we talking about an entity who is trying to make money running a Lightning node. Now, you can make money as an individual, but it takes a lot of effort, right? And you're not probably going to make that much money yourself. So I think that if there are certainly economic niches that one can occupy as a business, and there are even economic niches that one can occupy as an individual. But I don't think that the average person should get into the Lightning Network right now, running their own nodes, expecting to make a significant amount of sats per unit time.
Almost like the original question, which was framed as, is the reward profile of this amount of risk worth it? To P's answer, no for individuals.
Well, I would
answer my own question.
It was important because I did not.
Exactly.
I think that so when the Lightning Network was first like really gaining traction, people love to like post on Twitter like #reckless, because it was like, you know, like, hey, we're fucking bleeding edge shit. Like, who knows? And I certainly lost funds learning how Lightning worked because I just like, you know, locked it up. I fucked up my channel openings, fucked up my channel closing. But we're not in that world anymore. The Lightning Network has matured dramatically since then. And it is 100% possible to lose funds on the Lightning Network by accidentally fucking something up. But the educational materials are so much more mature. So I actually wouldn't put it as a risk reward in terms of like, you know, where your funds could be allocated if not in the Lightning Network, right? Because I think when you're talking about risk reward, it's like you have to talk about opportunity cost. You're raising your eyes up as if you're like, Jesus Christ, he is not answering my fucking question. Is that fair?
I'll be fully honest, man. This office space is just too distracting to do the show from.
Yeah, Q has his face in like fucking like Megatron style TV that's like just like outside of his eye line, so he's looking at his own reaction, and it's horrible for him.
That's extremely. I would not like that at all, dude. What happened to doing the show from your mom's basement? My mom's attic is working just fine, dude. I routed this Ethernet cable 150 feet.
Look, I'm in.
You fucking did it.
My landlord tried to raise the rent, and I'm in deep negotiations right now with my landlord on the insane amount. Yes, my mom tried to raise the rent on me.
Okay, man. Well, hey, I mean, there's always this office space that you can sleep in.
Okay, wait. Jumping all the way back though, Joe, I'm curious what you think here. When we talk about risk reward profile, the ROI of an individual is always going to be very different from the ROI of a business. And I think as an individual, like most individuals are not viewing it from the perspective of like, how much could I be making if I was loaning my Bitcoin out or doing something else instead? And I think that factors into it. Tell me if I'm totally butchering that, Joe.
No, you're 100% on it, because as of right now, we already rely on intermediaries with expertise to facilitate our payments. And this idea that every single aspect of a Bitcoin Lightning denominated economy would be decentralized is silly. Personally, that's what I believe. And with something like the Lightning Network, you're exactly right. Individuals care about it, not because, you know, little Timmy living in Botswana right now, who is, you know, his under intense political strife, cares about earning yield on his $5 that he parks in the Lightning Network. He cares about being able to transact right over the Lightning Network and not be censored, and do it in a way that is extremely low fee compared to the Bitcoin main chain. So that's the idea. You know, for individuals, it matters less, because what they're focused on, what they use the Lightning Network for, is the Lightning Network's utility, and that's sending Bitcoin, right? Not on the main chain that's secure, that's like moving gold bars on a tank, but more like, you know, verifiably taking those representations of Bitcoin and then transacting them infinite amount of times across this network before finally settling up. That's what the individual cares about. This entire piece is more so for large bank-like entities who have a lot of capital to deploy, for corporations who want to raise funds in some way and are looking to, you know, experiment in new ways and potentially be first movers. That's basically what this publication is for. It's for, you know, this theory of a Bitcoin Lightning denominated capital market and how we could get there. And how we get there is through publishing a widely reported rate of return to attract a lot of collateral, so market participants can buy and sell collateral to meet their loan obligations, and then, you know, eventually that spurs off into a full-blown Bitcoin denominated capital market. That's the idea. That's what this paper is for the average individual, just using the Lightning Network to transact. They've got their Bitcoin in cold storage, but periodically they re-up their funds, to their Lightning wallet and just use it recreationally. You're going to have little to no risk, right? Just, remember your phone password, don't download any fishy things, and basically you'll be fine, right? It's sort of an extension of what we already do in our own lives. We rely on a lot of intermediaries to get everyday things done. I'm relying on Citizens Bank to not close off my credit cards, right, in order to go out and buy this water, right? And so in a Bitcoin denominated capital market, same as today, people at the individual level will rely on these people who have more technical expertise in managing Lightning channels in order to facilitate these payments. That's, just how it's going to be, right? When the fishes get so big, that's basically how sats are going to move across the Lightning Network.
Just so you know, Joe, this is what water looks like. Doesn't some water comes in a can, but
what does that have to do with anything? Oh, okay. This is a reference.
You don't understand the beef that Joe and I have.
Yeah,
neither does anyone else in this fucking chat. Everybody's like,
no, I'm ignoring everyone else in the chat today. You guys are lovely. I love you all. Shout out the OG homies, D348, Goblin Hunter, Gobble. I honestly, your name, I have no idea what it is. I make up a different version of it every day I see you in the chats. I know you guys are all there. Hammersaw. Shout out to all of you guys who are tuning in repeatedly. All right, I want to move on to Magma. Talk to us about, Joe, just what is Magma, and throw out a comp for what exactly it is in traditional financial markets, because this exists, in my opinion.
It does. Yeah, it's very cool. It's sort of akin to, Magma can be thought of basically, you're lending to, whenever you want a rate of return, whether you know it or not, you're lending your money to somebody. And Lightning, Magma is essentially this Lightning liquidity marketplace where you can lease ownership of your Lightning channel for a period of time and earn a rate of return on top of that. So with the Lightning Network, there are basically, this is a completely separate method of generating yield. With the Lightning Network, you're routing fees. Okay, so you have a channel and you're earning a base fee, right, on all your transactions, and a fee rate. And that is your APR. That is your interest rate that you're earning. With Magma, it's basically a marketplace where you could sign in with your node. It's really, really cool. Everybody should go check it out, amboss.space/Magma. You can browse it. You don't have to be a node operator to take a look at it. And so essentially, you can lease your Lightning channel liquidity, or you could buy others' Lightning channel liquidity for a minimum specified period of time. And that is essentially basically the way that you borrow, the rate that gets determined at which you borrow, has nothing to do with the Lightning Network itself. It is completely separate from routing transactions. The rate that you're borrowing at is actually set at the moment of sale, and it's set by the person who's leasing their Lightning channel liquidity. And so because this isn't derived, as I mentioned earlier, from native node data that would have to be self-reported, aggregated, averaged, this is more so basically Magma. What they do, Amboss, they aggregate all of the APRs for that week, and then they average them and they publish them. And this is basically an APR that gets determined off of a variety of proprietary factors, but it's separate from the routing fee rate that you would earn on the Lightning Network itself. So it's an auxiliary Lightning Network auxiliary to the Lightning Network reference rate. So in traditional finance terms, basically corporations, they borrow at a spread to something, to a reference rate. In the case of Magma, this can be thought of as being liquidity that gets leased out at an interest rate at a spread to the Lightning Network reference rate, which is theoretical. It doesn't exist yet. This is not unlike a reputable company like Apple borrowing at a 0.5% spread to the United States 3-month Treasury bill. That's essentially what the equivalent is here. That is what's called, Apple can borrow at that rate. They borrow at US 3-month plus 50 basis points. This Magma APR is sort of Lightning Network reference rate plus however many basis points you're borrowing at based on the risk profile of the person who is, or based on your own personal rate of return that you set at the time of the transaction. That's essentially the comparison I would use, right? So whereas the Lightning Network reference rate is sort of the risk-free rate equivalent, a Lightning liquidity lease on something like Magma is sort of, it trades at like a basis point spread to the Lightning Network reference rate.
So have you looked into or included in your analysis, tools like Lightning Pool? There's a few other ones that it sounds like provide a similar service to Magma.
Yeah. So with Magma, the reason I used them was because with other providers, and you mentioned Pool, they were actually the first one to do this, I believe, have a liquidity marketplace by Lightning Labs. Unreal, absolutely very, very cool thing. They did it much earlier than Magma. With Magma, you don't actually have to have a node to log on and take a look at all the data. And so that's why this was sort of the route that I went down. But I did include because I wanted to make sure that I was using all the correct language and not saying that Magma was the very first, but they're the first widely published, right? So there isn't like a barrier to entry in terms of running a node. I dropped Pool by Lightning Labs, and also one other thing by Lightning Labs down in the sources at the very bottom, just for posterity's sake. But for this analysis, I used Magma.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, I have not played around with Magma, but I do love Amboss. Jestifer is a friend of the show, awesome dude.
He's fantastic.
One of the creators of Amboss. Very, very patient. When I was learning all this stuff, I'd be like, "Hey, how does this work?" And he would jump in and answer any questions I had. One of the things that's interesting about Lightning Pool, and I suspect that it's gotten a lot better since the last time I was trying to participate in it, which was probably over a year ago at this point. So take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. But the system, like the sort of rating systems that were used to determine whether or not a person could, purchase or lease liquidity, were at that point fairly opaque, and they had to do with boss scores, which is something that was, sort of proprietary algorithm. I wonder how Magma is doing it, or is it literally just if you have the funds, you can?
Yeah. So Magma, they do it. It's also a proprietary thing, but it's all on their their Git book, right? So you can go to docs.amboss.space, and then all of this is publicly available. This is like a total treasure trove of the way that Magma works, and basically your ability to borrow and lend, and like the rates that you can borrow and lend at. And this is all like information that's available, is aggregated into something called reputation. So like not unlike a traditional credit score, like, credit worthiness of large borrowers, the Magma reputation is sort of like the Magma equivalent of that. And it's 20% track record, 30% speed, and 50% reliability. And so those are the components of this reputation score that go into the rate at which somebody can borrow and lend. Basically, are you a good channel peer, or are you not a good channel peer?
Got it.
So let's talk about, why do we need Magma?
For sure. So, and not to sound like a broken record, but basically a widely published rate of return on invested capital, that's the precursor to a capital market. A capital market is, basically a slew of financial instruments that people can purchase and people can sell. And that's what denominates, that is what will push Bitcoin to a reserve currency status. The reason the United States dollar is a world reserve currency, is because it's not because of our military might and our prowess and how pretty Joe Biden is. It's because we have a deep and liquid trillions of dollars capital market that has a slew of financial instruments for people to park their United States dollars in. And that is essentially the precursor to any capital market is, are there instruments that I could put my wealth in that I can capture a rate of return with? If there are, I'll allocate capital towards it, right? And that's how that burgeons and expands. And so Magma is one of the first steps in order to making this happen, right? We talked about Lightning Pool by Lightning Labs. There's also LN Router, but Magma is, again, another one entering the space. And this is good developments that you want to see. The more widely published rates of return you have, market participants can go and compare rates. They can say, do I want to park my wealth here? Do I want to park my wealth here? And that's the utility of Magma. That's why we need Magma. And also the more that's the like grandiose, this is going to lead to a global capital market reason for Magma. The more granular reason, the actual utility of it, is to secure inbound liquidity, right? For node operators, one of the hardest things when you're just starting out a channel, is securing inbound liquidity in order to route transactions. And there are several solutions for this. One of them is to use Magma and to lease your liquidity if you efficiently operate a channel and earn a rate of return on that. And if I was a new node operator, I could borrow some of that liquidity, get started. There's also with Voltage, who's a sponsor of the Bitcoin layer, they're fantastic, is they just launched, basically you can get inbound liquidity directly from Voltage, right? So that overcomes one of the major hurdles in starting out a Lightning channel. But that's the granular reason for why Magma exists. But the big grandiose reason is that the more of these basically rates of return that are published, the more market participants have the ability to compare, and ostensibly, that will lead to more and more liquidity flowing into the system. If there was no sort of instrument that market participants could peruse, and they had to do all their own due diligence and dive down these esoteric rabbit holes like we have, then Bitcoin and Lightning wouldn't grow beyond a certain point. At a certain point, the people and their businesses that are dedicated to creating these methods of earning actual yield, they're the ones that are inching us closer to sort of this Bitcoin denominated global capital market. So that's the more grandiose reason for something like Magma. The more of these that exist, the closer we are to that eventual future.
So I want to be careful about how I phrase this. But ultimately, like the catastrophe or the mayhem that we bore witness to earlier in 2022 was due in large part to a lot of promises about yield. And I have to ask the question of what is necessary about this, that like, while we're not introducing another token, while this is to help further develop the Bitcoin layer and in turn the Lightning Network layer built on top of the base layer, how does earning yield, or at least pitching it as earning yield on Bitcoin, a positive thing?
Because it's actual yield. We've mangled the definition of yield so much, and I want to be careful with that for the viewers. There's a distinction between yield from nowhere and yield through efficiently routing transactions. With efficiently routing transactions, you're providing a service that requires your expertise, your active channel management, your active security, your active, working to build robust security around it. That requires a lot of human capital, and routing fees are people paying you for that service, right? So this is like an actual business actually earning yield. So that's what you have over here on the Lightning Network side, right? When it comes to this yield concept that has been jammed down our throats over the last several years, and really blew up in people's faces over the last 6 months earlier this year, is not yield. What it is essentially, and I think I talked about this the first show that I was on here with you guys, but it's essentially yield from nowhere, right? So yield, which used to mean you are investing capital and then you're earning a return on that invested capital because that capital is being used. Now yield just means either that capital is being taken and parked in extremely risky protocols, like this DeFi stuff, Aave, Sushi Swap, whatever Celsius was doing, or your yield is coming in the form of a completely worthless token that gets printed out of thin air. And the definition of yield has been so mangled. And so when people hear, oh, Lightning Network is a way that you can earn risk-free yield, right? It requires active channel management. It requires a lot of liquidity in order to make this profitable, right? Because you have to, build these connections to actually get transactions. Because again, we're in the very early phases of this. So it's not as if it's yield from nowhere. There's a tremendous amount of work that goes into building out a profitable Lightning channel and then actively managing that Lightning channel and establishing new connections. And at the end of the day, the yield you're earning is from providing a service, right? You're developing expertise and building out a profitable Lightning channel, and people pay you for that in the form of the Lightning Network searching for the most profitable route for your transaction to go to. So that's sort of the distinction I would draw for the listeners. There's yield from nowhere, where you're parking your funds with basically a casino essentially, and they're paying back additional funds to you through creating new tokens or through taking your entire deposit and putting it with an extremely risky borrower. That's the distinction I would make. Perhaps new standardized language needs to be made in order to draw the distinction, because the word yield has been so mangled over these last couple of months that, to some degree, you really need to explain with Lightning Network how all of this works so people are incentivized to park their funds. For the time being, it's going to be a scary prospect for a lot of people that lost tens of thousands of dollars in these horrible protocols that were offering promises they couldn't keep.
I'm just prepping my motion for the next cult meeting of all Bitcoiners, and we'll be putting forward a motion to forever remove the word yield from all Bitcoiners' vocabulary once and for all. Because I think, to your point, it has been co-opted to mean 5,001 different things, and unfortunately, the most recent iteration of the word yield has a very negative connotation instinctively. I'm just waiting for when Rug Pauls, honestly, I refuse to learn how to pronounce that man's name properly at this point. But when Rug Paul decides that, the Lightning Network is my next best bet to siphon money into my pockets.
Nobody won't.
And why is that, P?
Big
story time from our elder statesman.
No, I mean, because to your point, the types of strategies that he is interested in are not actually
effortful.
Yeah, exactly. They're not effortful. They do not involve providing a service. So the way the Lightning Network works, to Joe's point, is that like you provide a service to people, and it's as I said, for me personally, it's been very enjoyable to sort of like figure out like what are effective strategies, and by that I mean like where do people need liquidity, where they're like where's liquidity underserved in the Lightning Network right now. Like you can go and you can find these sort of like isolated communities, and when I say isolated, I mean like they don't have significant high value like channels to sort of these like large economic nodes, and you can sort of like be the intermediary there and provide real value. Whereas Raw Paul and people like that are primarily interested in basically just finding opportunities where they can, I would argue, take advantage of the market to make lots of money very rapidly, which end up being, in most cases, kind of Ponzi-esque schemes.
Yeah. So printing a token out of thin air, coming up with some sort of marketing budget from some entity, getting a whole lot of people to pile in because you have a very large platform, and then systematically dumping your money onto this newfound liquidity before you exit, you make a profit. That's what the name of the game is for some of these larger scammers, right? With the Lightning Network, to P's point, it does require a lot of expertise and a lot of effort, far and away beyond sort of this snake oil salesman-esque methodology that a lot of these people who have been trumpeting the idea of yield, that isn't really yield, like to employ, right? So it's too effortful for some of these people to sort of co-opt. And, if they were to be like, yeah, I'm going to use this as my next way of scamming people, like in saying you're going to scam people, what are you going to do? Are you going to set up all these, brand new Lightning channels with hundreds of millions of dollars of liquidity? Thanks. Like, you just actually benefited users of the Lightning Network, So, it sort of dissuades people who are trying to be bad actors and just get liquidity from unsuspecting market participants, and more so attracts good-natured entities, who are looking to earn a yield through putting their expertise out, providing a real service to people.
Okay, I've sidetracked the conversation enough. We can go back down the proper rabbit hole, and this is, I think, the most important part of the conversation that you guys introduced, and it's the conversation around Taro. Joe, do you want to set the stage for us?
Taro's cool as hell. So Taro is an in development protocol by Lightning Labs. I hope I use the correct vernacular when I say protocol. Again, not an expert in this, but they announced it at Bitcoin 2022. And essentially what it is a method for issuing new assets and routing them via the Bitcoin primary blockchain and Lightning as well, right? So a lot of people will take a look at that and go, oh no, shitcoin, right? There's the possibility of that. But there's also the possibility of all the world's currencies flowing through Bitcoin's liquidity, right? So leveraging the security of the main Bitcoin blockchain, right, in order to issue, send, and hold stablecoins. A digital euro, a digital dollar running over the Bitcoin blockchain. Think of this not in our terms, because the three of us in this call, we may not need dollars in Bitcoin in the same wallet, like actual wallet, as somebody, in a more impoverished nation that, can't withstand the volatility of something like Bitcoin, but the censorship resistance of the blockchain and the transactability of the Lightning Network is something they need, but they can't take the volatility. This circumvents that in a major way. So Strike has a similar business model to this, right? But with Strike, they rely on, being able to basically hold dollars in Bitcoin and send dollars and somebody else receives Bitcoin, but it relies on good banking relationships in order to occur, right? All of this is occurring on Strike's databases. With Taro, it essentially makes that concept of holding Bitcoin and dollars or whatever other currency in the same wallet, and it makes it native to Bitcoin itself, and it makes it native to Lightning itself. So that's essentially what Taro allows for. And, this extends that concept of a Bitcoin denominated capital market we just talked about, because now not only are you attracting a crazy amount of collateral to Bitcoin with these widely reported reference rate that have ostensibly lower risk profiles than traditional finance, but now you're also attracting market participants who wouldn't have otherwise invested if there wasn't like a dollar instrument on there. So now, there's basically this opens the floodgates. Again, this is, as of right now, I'm no technical expert, but, this would open up the floodgates for, dollars, euro, yen, yuan, any actual, fiat currency that you could think of, or a stable coin representing that being held in the same wallet as Bitcoin and transacted across the Bitcoin and the Lightning Network. It's pretty revolutionary. And so, now what would have otherwise been, a rather large capital market on Bitcoin, now you can have a Bitcoin denominated capital market that has traditional finance instruments on top of it, right? So now you're running dollar instruments, you're running euro instruments across these Lightning Network rails, across this counterparty free settlement network. I may be getting lost in the weeds, but to getting a bit too excited here, but that's essentially what the prospect of this holds in my eyes.
So let's talk about where this would then fall in comparison to things that are already, full. I'm probably going to use the wrong verbiage here, but I was going to say fully flushed out, like Magma, for example. Where does it sort of fit in this risk return, and how does it sort of relate to the others as well?
Yes, of course. So, again, I'll back up to basically, for people who might just be tuning in, with a risk curve is visualizing the risk and return profile of like these investable vehicles within a capital market, right? Within a deep and liquid market for purchasing and selling financial instruments. In traditional finance, you could essentially visualizing that as gold being the least risky, providing zero return, US Treasuries providing some return, being slightly more risky, and then corporate bonds, equities, venture capital, all of those are slightly higher up the ladder. My dog is barking outside the door. And then in Bitcoin, something like Taro would exist a little bit higher up the risk curve, not because of any inherent Lightning Network flaw or obviously there is more risk incurred in the Lightning Network, but with something like Taro, the variability in the risk profile, and of course, what goes in line with that is the return demanded on that risk profile, that fluctuates probably pretty wildly, all in line with the creditworthiness of the asset issuer, right? When you're this is all theoretical in my mind. Like if you were to borrow or lend in an asset that was issued using Taro, you're incurring all of the associated risk that you would with the asset issuer, depending on the asset issuer. So like if the United States government, they wanted to issue, when they were, doing a treasury auction, they want to issue, $1 trillion of 3-month T-bills over the Bitcoin network and try it out. Obviously, that would incur much less risk than, me, if I wanted to issue a bond through Taro that was denominated in Dogecoin in order to go buy a grill or something. I don't know. Right. So at like these Taro assets, borrowing and lending them, like in theory, they would have all the assumed risk of whoever's issuing the asset. Again, I could be totally wrong on that. I haven't, the Taro is early in development. The technical wherewithal of understanding all of the documents are way over my head. But, in a Bitcoin denominated capital market, you would sort of say cold storage Bitcoin incurs the least risk. Lightning Network, natively operating a channel, incurs slightly more risk. A liquidity lease, right? Giving your liquidity to somebody else, slightly more. Taro, right? All of the different risks associated with the issuer, slightly more. And then, of course, at the far end of the curve would be off-chain lending, right? So you're not getting the benefit of the security of Bitcoin when you're lending, but you're using, let's say, the Lightning Network APR that you earn as a reference rate. That's basically the risk, like the theoretical future Bitcoin Lightning risk curve. And I feel Taro would be somewhere towards the middle / upper end of that, but it would fluctuate wildly depending on, the creditworthiness of the issuer, or the reputation rather, I think is a better word, of the issuer.
I just want to draw attention to the fact that in this risk curve that you just spelled out, at the extreme, like, yo, you fucking crazy, is like you give your Bitcoin to somebody else and then just hope that they're going to give it back to you one day, which is exactly what is presented as kind of like the standard when we talk about places.
That sort of uncollateralized lending is exactly what Celsius was doing, man.
Exactly.
Your customers were parking their funds and basically saying, all right, 20% yield here, do whatever you want with it. That's the far, far end of the Bitcoin risk curve. I wouldn't even call it Bitcoin risk curve, the wider crypto, in quotes, risk curve.
Yep. Oh, speaking of which, we were talking about a story, just to take us completely off track, recently around this document that was like all Celsius sort of creditors was released. And it was like thousands and thousands of names. And we were like super excited. We were like, oh shit, WEF is in here. Fucking Klaus getting fucked up. And somebody pointed out online, fucking BTC Incorporated, Bitcoin Magazine was also in this list. So I have to assume that it was basically everyone from any possible source that Celsius owed money to. So, they were sponsors of B21 and B22. So I'm assuming that basically those things were not paid and then they are still being waited on. So
probably like when you enter bankruptcy court, not to interject, but like you grasp for like you have to have due diligence down to like the atom. And so like, yeah, in something as interconnected as like a borrowing and lending system, sure. The World Financial, the World Economic Forum probably has something to do with the way that my car, was that my car loan got created, right? Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't dove into the document extensively, or as extensively as Dylan. I think he loves tearing through those documents more than I. I'm not a big, tearing into the nitty gritty granular stuff to the same degree as him, but absolutely crazy. Come on, guys, quit lending to Celsius.
Yeah, 100%. So, Joe, shifting slightly, what else has got you? What else are you focused on right now in terms of the Bitcoin ecosystem? What technological innovations? What areas of the progress that is being made has caught your attention? We've been talking about Lightning a lot, but I'm curious where else you're focused.
For sure. So really Taro, I think, Taro sort of, it paves the way for, like I mentioned, it's sound like a broken record, but like a deep and robust market for collateral completely underwritten by the Bitcoin network and can be transacted across the Lightning network. And so that is probably like forefront of mind in terms of what I want to continue trumpeting, in the articles that I write, in the sort of theoretical research that myself and Nick continue writing. That's one of the things that I'd like to explore more. I think over at Lightning Labs, they're doing some pretty remarkable stuff. They really are, in terms of pushing us towards something like a global capital market that subsumes all the world's liquidity, because you could hold all of your currency, basically everything you'd ever need, and you could have the security of the Bitcoin blockchain, and you could have that transactability of the Lightning network, right? I think Taro right now is probably one of the least talked about things, because everybody collectively marveled at Strike and what they were doing, and it is absolutely remarkable what they're doing. But essentially, Taro is sort of an offshoot of that. It's a very similar concept, but it will be completely native to this network that is underwritten by an asset that, when it's custodied, has zero counterparty risk, right? It makes it completely native to Bitcoin. So as of right now, I'm really, in terms of Bitcoin technology, I'm really watching, Taro and to the best of my ability. In terms of wider markets, there's a slew of other things that I'm taking a look at the Bitcoin layer. With Nick, one of the things that we try to do is really take a look at Bitcoin, but through a rates lens, through a macro lens, a much wider view, so we can be as impartial as possible on like where Bitcoin is on this proverbial path to world reserve currency status, what its correlations look like, how responsive it is to rates, because ultimately, the rates, credit, these are the things that run the show, and really, I spend a whole lot of my time monitoring those, taking a look at where those are at, and trying to, probabilistically say what's going to happen in the near future.
I'm back. I had to go confirm what P was saying. I felt like the opportunity was there, and of course everyone was on the phone. No one could confirm it. But I do believe that that part of the list is only people regarding Celsius and why the fuck BTC Inc. showed up. Unconfirmed. I'm trying to find the exact answer, but it is said that section was because they at one point or another did business with us, and that is why we showed up on the list.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was drawing attention to.
Yeah, I don't think we're owed money by them anymore, because if we are, we ain't never seeing that again.
Not a chance. I think in terms of the creditor, the priority of getting back to creditors, I think the World Economic Forum, unfortunately, is probably higher than you guys on that list.
What?
Whoa, hang on a second now. You would rather pay the WEF than Bitcoin Magazine? Get him off this show. Get him off.
I wouldn't rather pay the WF than Bitcoin Magazine. I know that Klaus Schwab and his goons would be at my front door if I owed money to the WF and Bitcoin Magazine. I paid BTC Inc. first.
All right, look, you're behind the 8 ball now, man. Now you have the NSA and the WEF coming for your mom's attic. Like, you better buy your mama some flowers tonight and apologize for the shitstorm that's to come. Joe, before we go over to the macro, because as you've mentioned, you guys do an excellent job of, looking at Bitcoin through the lens of macro, which is so vitally important right now. Is there anything else we didn't get a chance to touch on regarding the time value of the Lightning Network? What you guys have sort of done here? Anything else you wanted to touch on?
So really, I'll just end by basically like almost going verbatim on the abstract of this paper and why it's so important. Just to give basically, a sound bite or whatever. But with the Lightning Network, with these formalized lending practices, just like liquidity marketplaces like Taro, like Lightning Pool, like LN Router, these are going to facilitate greater economic activity that's native to Bitcoin, right? The Lightning Network has already positioned itself as the capital market layer for Bitcoin, offering a rate of return on invested capital, and then also offering a slew of options of financial instruments to attract collateral, right? And collateral is the precursor to this major wide sweeping capital market. And so you've got that, and then Taro sort of brings this multi-asset functionality to the table that will broaden the scope of that capital and money market that's underwritten by Bitcoin, underwritten by the Lightning Network, right? So that is essentially what I'll leave it at. This is very revolutionary stuff. The people and businesses that are making this happen, Amboss, Lightning Labs, everybody else that's working on it, these are the people that are paving the way for the future. I'm just doing my best over at the Bitcoin layer to bring that information to the public and sort of put it through a legacy financial theory lens so that traditional TradFi market participants can take a look at this, and potentially start positioning capital into the Lightning Network and into Bitcoin.
So when none of us can afford a Bitcoin because all of TradFi has officially bought up all the last cheap sats, we can point our fingers at you?
No comment, potentially.
Like truly excellent work over the Bitcoin layer. If you are not subscribed to their newsletter, Joe will tell you where to go at the end of this, but I highly recommend this whole discussion. There's a paper that Joe and Nick have written up. If you have not yet had a chance to read it, please go ahead and do it. It's Monday and I'm fumbling over my words, but let's talk my favorite topic, which is macro. And specifically, you guys at the Bitcoin layer spend so much more time focusing on bonds and interest rates, as they seem to be telling everyone and everything what the hell's going on. So what are you guys seeing? What are you guys paying attention to? And what is your definition of a recession?
Yeah. So there are a couple of things we're monitoring, right? Again, we sort of use rates to lead all of our discussion, but there's also a few key economic releases this week that will, as you mentioned, sort of push us closer to a recession. As of right now, CPI, the expected CPI is 8.7% year on year, and that's releasing Wednesday. And so any miss on CPI whatsoever would mean, and a miss to the upside, that'd be very bad. That'll basically give the Fed the green light to absolutely decimate the economy in terms of continuing the rate hikes, pushing for a higher terminal rate, pushing for a terminal rate that's further out. Basically, before the labor report, there was consensus in the market, and I had thought to a pretty large degree that the Fed was going to have to wrap up relatively soon, specifically because taking a look at the 2-year yield, that was coming down, and essentially, the 2-year yield leads Fed funds. So the 2-year yield is forward policy rate expectations. And so when, wherever that moves, the Fed essentially has to move. And 2-year yield, that was coming down because presumably, the rates market was telling the Fed, hey, it seems you've already tightened enough. But with the strong labor report, that basically is the Fed's first green light that they can continue hiking higher and potentially into Q1 2023 because the economy seems stronger than we anticipated. Obviously, their mandate is to kill inflation. If the CPI print comes in hot, if it accelerates year on year, those are nightmare scenarios that would basically give the Fed full steam ahead. Their runway was already extended, seeing that we have a strong labor market. A CPI miss would give the Fed full steam ahead to just absolutely plow the markets and say, all right, 3.5% terminal rate in Q1. Now we're going for 4%, right? Which obviously isn't a sustainable thing, but CPI accelerating, that's their number one concern right now. And so all eyes are on CPI really on Wednesday. That's one of the big things we're watching right now, but also taking a look at rates. So as I mentioned, the 2-year yield really leads the Fed. If you take a look at a graph of the 2-year yield mapped against the federal funds rate, you can really see that when the 2-year yield falls below the Fed funds rate, the Fed is forced to pause their cycle. And as of right now, there's about there is literally right now, I have it in front of me, a 71 basis point or 0.71% spread between the 2-year yield and Fed funds. So the Fed still has 71 basis points of clearance to continue hiking. If all of a sudden the 2-year yield were to drop, pretty expeditiously, that could happen if, again, if CPI prints the way we want it to. The 2-year yield could begin its ascent back down to earth, because that's the market basically saying, all right, Fed, you've done enough work. CPI is decelerating. Then that would be sort of the case for the Fed pausing, after September potentially. And then, we'll see what the 2-year yield does. But essentially, that's one of the big things we're monitoring. We're also monitoring the 10-year yield, which represents forward growth and inflation expectations. So if that's coming down, that's also the market signaling that they feel the Fed has done enough work to slow down inflation and slow down the economy. And that caught a bid in the recent couple of, that's begun to sell off again in the recent couple of weeks, and the yield on that has bounced up from a low of 2.5, which we actually called over at the Bitcoin layer. We called for 2.5 a couple of months ago. It's bounced back up to 2.7 now. So potentially, again, and this is mirroring what the economy believes growth and inflation to be. If we get a CPI miss, then you could, probably see this climb a little bit higher. So we're also watching now. We're watching 5-year inflation swaps, which are inflation expectations for 6 to 10 years out. That's actually one of the instruments that the Fed watches to see if they're doing their job on fighting inflation. And those have started actually coming down in the last week. And so there are several different signals, basically all going back to this same road of, okay, if the economy is still rip-roaring hot, we got this jobs report. If the economy is still rip-roaring hot from a consumer price index inflation standpoint, then the Fed could, really put on their hats and hunker down with the hikes. But that's basically all we're watching right now. The 2-year yield is still trading relatively wide above Fed funds, but basically monitoring that. That is the most important thing to be monitoring. The relationship between the 2-year Treasury yield and the federal funds rate. That is our signal for when the Fed is going to pause. And then, people are calling for a pivot, I believe, too soon. They forget that there is an intermediary phase between a hike cycle and a pivot, and that is a pause. And chances are, if things play out as we believe, or as I believe, rather, I don't want to put words in Nick's mouth, but we might be looking at a pause sooner than most think. I think people are conflating a pause and a pivot. A pause is far more likely than a pivot would be. If we have this massive, awful deflationary spike, asset prices get sent through the floor, yeah, you'd get a pivot. But if the economy slows down like the Fed wants it to, you get a pause and you normalize around wherever we are now, right? Wherever they end up at, 2.75 or 3%. Long-winded, but that's essentially what we're looking at. What my personal market expectations are moving into CPI on Wednesday. All eyes on CPI.
All eyes on the CPI, which will come out on Wednesday. We saw the jobs report. We had a long discussion with you as well, Joe, on Friday that these numbers may look good on paper or at initial glance, but could actually be a lot worse than we're anticipating. So we have the jobs reports, we got CPI, PPI, all that nonsense that they're going to feed us. Is there any other economic indicator that you think you're paying attention to that will impact the Fed's decision making?
Yes. So they look at the spread between the 3-month and 10-year yield. That's the literally last rate I'll mention, because I know a lot of people find it tiresome. But the Fed watches 5-year inflation swaps, because that's forward inflation expectations 6 to 10 years out. And they watch the spread between the 3-month Treasury bill and the 10-year Treasury note, right? So that's what they watch. Basically, if we watch the 3-month 10, because we know the Fed watches these things, they may not look out further along the curve, which they should, because they could prevent a lot of catastrophe if they looked at the 5-year inverting with the 10-year, but they don't. That
is the funniest thing you have ever said. You mean to tell me you think it would be helpful if the Federal Reserve did their job?
I think it'd be really helpful. They're not even remotely prescient, and they don't try to be. They really don't.
He's single, ladies. For the one girl that's out there listening, Joe Consorti is single, lives in his mother's attic.
I live in my mother's attic. Q, I think that's giving the show a little bit too much. I don't know if there are any girls listening. But anyway, a couple of other things to look at is, oh gosh, what was I going to say? Blah, 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 blah. Oh gosh. Well, you've got PMIs, obviously. Good Lord.
The 310s are inverted.
Yes. So 310s are 21 basis points away from inverting. That will be a huge other signal that the Fed has gone too far. The Fed would basically, at this point, they're being pro-cyclical. So the Fed's supposed to be counter-cyclical, right? During these huge boom phases, they're supposed to tighten the reins on the economic horses and slow us down a little bit. But instead, over the last 2 years, they decided to continue easing well through all of this. And then, so, when we're in a boom phase, they ease. And now that we're slowly going into a bust phase, they're tightening. So the Fed is being pro-cyclical. I was going to say, about jobs report. Yes, the jobs report. So the labor report, it could be a bit misleading. So non-farm payrolls, a massive beat. It is a massive beat, but it could be somewhat misleading. You want to be watching more leading indicators there, which would be jobless claims, right? So initial jobless claims, watching those as those tick up, as those continue ticking up. That's basically what you want to watch, right? So there is like a nightmare, and this is what I wanted to say. So there's a nightmare scenario where the Fed takes a look at non-farm payrolls and uses that as its sole barometer to say the economy is red hot right now. Let's continue hiking. 75 basis points is probable in September. Even if we didn't have a red hot labor market, 75 basis points would still probably be what we're getting. But we basically know at this point that 75 basis points, according to the Fed funds futures curve, which is really never wrong when we're this close to a meeting, is pricing in 75 basis points. But there's a nightmare scenario where the Fed, CPI comes in hot, and they take a look at, or even disregarding CPI, they use the non-farm payrolls meeting as their sole barometer to say, look, the economy is doing great. Let's do another 75. And then they increase their terminal rate. They push out when their terminal rate is going to be. So they go harder and longer. And then, the non-farm payrolls beat was a fluke. As it turns out, there is an obscene amount of jobless claims, and you just made money way more expensive than you should have, Jerome Powell. And then that sends markets to the floor, massive deflationary bust. That is a potential scenario. That's like a nightmare scenario. And I think that could be made potentially even worse if we have a CPI miss and the Fed is even more emboldened to hike beyond what the market can take. Because if this CPI is supply side driven, which I strongly believe that it is, right? We seized up supply chains for 2 straight years and we're still doing it. If this CPI is supply driven and the Fed is rapidly increasing the cost of money, and if the labor market is less strong than the Fed believes and they're rapidly increasing the price of money, then you could have this crazy deflationary bust because the Fed tightened way too much when in reality, the economy was already self-correcting in the other direction. So a lot of different fun scenarios to play out, but really watching CPI, watching 2s, 10s, 2s Fed funds, and 3-month 10s and 5-year inflation swaps. That's basically where eyes are right now, as well as how's the consumer doing. So looking at UMich consumer sentiment, looking at the small business optimism index. These are sort of all the things that we use to paint the clearest picture. We don't use too many beyond that, because if you use literally a million indicators, you're painting a more muddled picture than a clear picture. Simplicity is really key if you want to have like a concise and pretty accurate picture of what's going on. But that's the outlook for the next couple of months.
Before I let you go, and before I just want to remind everyone in the audience, we will be joined in just a moment by Dylan by the Bitcoin Magazine Pro will be joining us. Dylan, LeClair, Sam Rule in about like a few minutes. So hang tight. I'm not going to let Joe go away because I have one more question for him. If you are not yet subscribed to our channel, just press that button right there. I'm finally figuring this out. All the way down there, just press it. Press the subscribe button. We'll really appreciate it. If we get up to 100 likes while we are live, we'll drop some stats over in the YouTube chat. Joe, one thing that you said stood out to me, and I want to ask this final question. Inflation has 2 causes, supply and demand. Yeah. I have personally felt like the root of inflation, you can equate these things not necessarily equally. I would say it's probably 75% demand driven, 25% supply side driven. You said that you feel like supply has a heavier hand in inflation. I'm curious what would your percentage be for each allocation each's allocation towards inflation?
Yeah. So instead of talking like allocations, I'll talk like probabilities. You saw a lot of key metrics like new orders seizing up over the last couple of years, like completely seizing up. Obviously, new orders are cyclical, right? So similar to commodity prices, like, lumber is very cyclical. They ebb and flow sort of in this sawtooth pattern. You saw new orders really, really take a huge hit. And as a function of that, consumers were still spending because they had a whole lot of credit, drives prices up, right? A lot of it is supply shock driven, I believe, because of that. So I believe, like, probability wise, I'm assigning probably 70% supply driven inflation versus 30% this consumer price index inflation, and then 30% of it can be ascribed to demand side inflation.
But your rationale for the supply side of the equation is the fact that demand was so high that it actually took away supply, and then because we weren't manufacturing supply, that increased demand fucked over supply.
Yeah, so obviously with the monetary and fiscal easing that we had, people had more readily disposable income. But also, I wouldn't blame the consumer. I think the majority of it was caused these huge exogenous supply shocks that we experienced over the last 2 years.
Okay. This will probably be a discussion we pick up most likely in the Twitter sphere. But Joe, where can people know what the heck you're doing, what the heck the Bitcoin Layer is doing, stay up to date with all your guys' research?
For sure. So I'm on Twitter at Joe Consorti, at first name, last name, no space in between, as you see it on screen, and subscribe to the bitcoinlayer.substack.com. And once again, the bitcoinlayer.substack.com. We have a free tier. We do a free market update every single Saturday, as well as 2 paid posts that you won't want to miss, covering everything Bitcoin, macro, and rates.
Thank you so much, man. This was fantastic.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on after my terrible internet the last time.
Yeah, this is light years better. I'm so grateful that Nick paid you a decent enough wage so you can go plug into the 7-Eleven internet downstairs. I'm going to run to the restroom. We're going to be joined in just a moment with Dylan and Sam. I think P has some very smart words that everyone should listen to and do everything he says. Do not fuck this up, P. Do not fuck this up.
Oh, God. Roll the tape.
I got to pee.
We'll be back in a minute.
You are listening to Bitcoin Magazine Live. Listening to Bitcoin Magazine Live. Number 1 Bitcoin Magazine Live. You are listening to Bitcoin Magazine Live. Listening to Bitcoin Magazine Live. Number 1 Bitcoin Magazine Live. Sama.
What is up, guys? Welcome back, and thank you for sticking through those commercial breaks. We're going to kick things off in just a moment with Bitcoin Magazine Pro. You know the drill. We're just, technical stuff on the background. If you have not bought your ticket to Bitcoin Amsterdam, please, please, please use promo code BMLive to do so. Don't use any of the other ones. Use BMLive to please come join us in Amsterdam. All right. I think we have everyone. Hello, hello. Thank you all on the Twitter Spaces. We're going to get started in just a moment. Dylan, Sam, welcome.
Hey, how we doing?
There we go. Sam, welcome back from your hibernation. Um, I'll let you two sort of start us off a little bit. I know we wanted to touch on some of the news that came out today. Anything first off that you wanted to touch on from the monthly report released last week?
Just want to interrupt real quick, or I guess just before we get on that. So, I mean, I assume most of the listeners here have, if you haven't been on Twitter today, the Treasury blacklisted Ethereum Tornado Cash addresses, and it looks like USDC actually blacklisted all of those addresses as well, kind of confirming everyone's belief that the USDC and kind of just like the creeping up of an inevitable central bank digital currency is something that's not good. And USDC blacklisted all the Tornado Cash addresses, and just now tweeted literally 2 minutes ago, the founder of Tornado Cash, which is an open source project, right? Say what you want about Ethereum, think what you want about Ethereum as an asset or its long-term kind of arc of decentralization, centralization, but it still is open source. A lot of the code all of it, and the CEO of Tornado Cash, not CEO, the founder of Tornado Cash, just had his GitHub account suspended. So like this is getting really interesting, just in terms of if you think about Bitcoin as an open source project, Bitcoin devs as open source developers, Lightning, all of this stuff. Today's a pretty important day, and the precedent here isn't great, right? So just like I guess everybody as a Bitcoin holder. We talk about Bitcoin Magazine Pro. We talk a lot about Bitcoin as the asset and the price discovery of it, and its intersection with legacy finance. But just in terms of the cypherpunk movement and ethos, there's that still is kind of where Bitcoin thrives, is black market money. And today's precedent, even though it is Ethereum, even though it is stable coins, and that in theory, it can't happen to Bitcoin if you're running your own node, right? But it's just not a great precedent for privacy. And I think everybody should just be alert about what's coming down the pipe here over the next, few quarters, next few years. And just brace yourselves, whatever that means for you.
Like, let's just make this really easy for those who maybe don't really understand why Bitcoiners should care about anything that happened to the Ethereum side of things. Like, why do we need to care about this?
Yeah, I guess I'll just first off let's let Sam introduce. I mean, if do you have any thoughts on this, Sam? I don't know. I haven't really talked to you too much about this. I mean, we just send it in Slack to each other, but haven't really heard your in-depth thoughts. I think you're muted on the video, my man.
Just press M.
Did we lose Sam?
Sam, go to the Restream just like page where you could see Dylan and mine's pretty faces, and then like.
Sorry guys, we're having some trouble with the stream. Twitter Space just is I'm okay. This two recording thing is pretty tough, I gotta say. Even though I've done it a bunch.
You would think after attempt number 17 we would have this down.
Well, I think regardless of the tech difficulties, I think while we were planning on talking about this before, talking about just kind of like the macro backdrop, our recent monthly report, this is I think it's just top of mind here, just given how I guess there's a lot of people maybe that have came in the recent year, 2 years during the bull market and are in it for the number go up technology, and I think that long-term thesis still holds as true as ever in terms of the inevitability of more fiat currency debasement. The future price performance of Bitcoin will be good, but just in terms of living up to the potential of a true decentralized global currency, freedom, money, not just about the number go up. Like we just gotta be prepared, because it's going to be a fight. And like not your keys, not your coins, run your own full node, privacy, acquiring KYC free Bitcoin. Like these are all the things that in a macro based finance based newsletter, we don't really talk about too much, but it still is like in terms of Bitcoin ultimately winning, right? And I think we're on that path, but it's going to be bumpy. People got to prepare because otherwise it's just it's we're transacting on a transparent ledger here. Like that's the reality of Bitcoin, and we can't change that, right? So what are you doing to? I mean, do you know about your UTXOs? Can you do you have KYC free Bitcoin, or are you just transacting on a ledger where the state and kind of the whether it's a tax man or whatever is looking straight at you in the face, and everyone's got to think about that. I know I'm just kind of beating a dead horse here, but it's just not a good precedent today, and I think it's just only going to get tougher for Bitcoin companies, for open source software solutions. Like, there's a good chance that founder of Tornado Cash, right, gets kind of digitally canceled. He got his GitHub deleted. Like, GitHub is an open source software tool, so just like thinking adversarially about this sort of stuff, and how these centralized choke points will they'll have pressure put on them. The biggest exchanges, maybe even wallet software developers, which is like a scary thing, right? That's not ideal. And so just like preparing for this, because, Bitcoin's ultimate, maybe not reality, but ultimate fortune is it's not just going to be some, speculative asset, or at least hopefully not. Otherwise it's been kind of, for better or worse, excuse my French, cucked by the state. We really have to prepare and fight and build, because, that choke point is coming.
Excellent use of cucked, my friend. Sam, do we have you this time? Can you talk? Can we hear you? No. All right. So while Sam keeps cucking us, Dylan, I want to ask you, like, I do agree this idea that you can now just an open source software platform will just say, nope, you know what? We don't like this project anymore. So you're gone. Very scary. And in theory, the proposition could be there for Bitcoin. I do, however, think something like BlackRock's new partnership with Coinbase maybe helps keep Bitcoin in safer waters. I want to, however, have a conversation with you over this idea of whether or not we need to see regulation done at all around Bitcoin or crypto at large. And I want to focus it more on the crypto side of it. We saw Elizabeth Warren very shortly after the BlackRock announcement and news come out and say, I want to introduce some more powers for the SEC to now go and further have greater oversight over the securities that are being created by BlackRock over crypto assets. Is this a necessary thing, or is this just more of the same of far too much government overreach? We don't need this type of stuff. Get out of our cereal.
Yeah, I think like ultimately, or 90% of these altcoin, probably larger than 95%, right? Are a lot of these probably classified as securities? No. As does the cypherpunk kind of anarchist in me think that these should be prosecuted as securities? And I'm sorry if I said no earlier. They probably are, just decentralized in name only, a lot of them. But to see the BTC versus ETH wars, quote unquote, and like the call for the classification and overreach of the SEC to call all of these things in the entire ecosystem and all of the on-ramps and all of the off-ramp securities and securities exchanges. Like, if you look at what kind of FTX and Coinbase, as they get more and more kind of integrated with these law firms and the lobbyists, like, they're going to actually try to keep their competitive moat. And what that means is a complete kind of over-regulation and complete oversight from the state for, in theory, these crypto, or if you're just thinking Bitcoin specifically, on-ramps and off-ramps with KYC. And so, I'm not a fan of Gary Gensler going and saying ETH is a security. I'm not saying that. But the reality is that all this stuff is coming. And I just think it's, whether you're in Bitcoin, whether you're in crypto, whether you use stable coins on a DeFi rail, or you just buy Bitcoin every day and you send it to cold storage, like, you need to be thinking about what all this means. And, your trail of UTXOs, your trail of coins, like, if you have stable coins, if you don't, like, I'm not saying you've done anything illegal or not, but like, you should start thinking about these things, because it's these blockchain analysis softwares. I think it's not too hard to see. You can see the history of every single, UTXO or Bitcoin that's ever moved on the network with basic ease at this point. And so, just like, what's that mean for your altcoin or your DeFi protocol or your, KYC free coins, Ethereum, stablecoins, Bitcoin? Like, just be aware, because this trend of more overreach, more oversight, it's not, whether we're rooting for it or not, it's probably coming in the US at least, and globally as well. You see the big people, higher up talk about, if there's an escape route. Christine Lagarde said that. She's like, if there's an escape route, they will use it. Well, what do you think the result of, and we're in the midst of somewhat of an unwind in macro land, what do you think the result of a decade of future and former financial repression? Why do you think Bitcoin is even here in the first place? It's because the monetary system is utterly broken, and they're doing everything they can to kick the can down the road. And so in theory, if there's an on or off ramp, Bitcoin, in a world of super high inflation and the coming financial repression, whenever the Fed does eventually pivot, the reality is we can't have positive real yields. So there's gonna be a want and a desire to escape that system, that closed loop central bank digital currency dystopian future that, kind of we're all not scared of, but need to be vigilant of, because it's coming, it's looming. And so, that's just an unfortunate reality, but that's why Bitcoin, and we focus on Bitcoin here, Bitcoin Magazine Pro, Bitcoin Magazine. But I mean, I also follow what's going on with Ethereum, what's going on with stablecoins, what's going on with these other, quote unquote protocols, because I think it's interesting. And I think, ultimately a lot of this altcoin monetary premium is not actually sustainable, but, let people build is my thing, build things, break things. And, unfortunately, a lot of fraud is baked in with all of it as well, right? That's the downside. But I think on the other side of this, we want to have, a monetary system that can, scale to the entire world, and experimenting with privacy solutions and other rails isn't something that particularly bothers me. But that's just my opinion. And so sorry for rambling.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Hey, there he is.
After 3 weeks of fixing audio issues. No, you don't have to apologize for rambling, Dylan. That was great. You have the best rants. And hey again, everyone.
Sam, please build off of your colleagues' rants.
Yeah, just going back to the Tornado Cash, Ethereum kind of crackdown. I've always kind of viewed it as like that's probably the inevitable. It's like a bigger reason for Bitcoin as well, right? Like, you're going to live in this world where, whether it's a CBDC coming down the pipe or this like stable coin banking world, that's going to be, predominantly, I've got 140 billion in stable coins now. That's on what, is starting to really hit like rubber against the road on like what's decentralized, what's censorship resistant, what's permissionless. And you're going to live in these two worlds, and it's in circles, kind of incentives when you're looking at USDC or any kind of big stablecoin issuer. If they want to exist and be around, all the collateral that they're backed with their stablecoin are, different forms of treasury bills and T-bills and money market funds and, US collateral. If you want to keep that and sustain that and exist in the future, and there's probably a lot of what like the US government wants to see that play out as long as they can kind of have control, then I think you're going to run into a lot of issues like this all the time. And there's still a huge demand for US dollars and stable coins around the world globally. So even if this isn't permissionless or censorship resistant, people still want to get their hands on them. So it's still going to thrive. But I think that just, again, goes back to the case for Bitcoin, and why a new monetary system in that way is because, we're going to hit this road where essentially, whether it's stable coins or other protocols, blockchains that these things are going to be on, you're going to run into these control issues. And then Bitcoin's going to be sitting there and saying, okay, here's the decentralized censorship resistant permissionless. It's not US dollar, but it is that form that people can go to. So it's an option and a choice. And so just going to have to see that adoption play out. But I think this is just probably the start of it. Kind of the worst is yet to come here. especially in a world that is going to want increasingly more and more access to dollars. Maybe for the United States, central bank digital currency project underway. I know they're doing the one with MIT now. Maybe that's not necessarily the solution, but a highly regulated stablecoin industry is. So first of many, definitely concerning, and I think definitely opening the door for more people to consider Bitcoin in the future and its use. I think it goes back to, I think CK said this before, and I like it. I don't know if he's taking the quote for someone. It's kind of like, you go to Bitcoin in search of need or greed. Either you're in need of it for some reason, and what you think you're going to need in the future, whether that's self-sovereign money, or whether that's a corrupted monetary network or debasement, or whatever you're trying to get away from, or you're looking at it from a greed perspective, kind of self-interest in saying that you want to play that future opportunity and you want your purchasing power to go up, and you see that as the money of the future. So I think, probably just getting started in terms of these announcements and what's coming down the pipe.
I want to present a question for you both that you may or may not like my phrasing. Feel free to, as P has time and time again done, just completely ignore my question and answer something different. But this is, as you guys have mentioned, this is not the first attempt by the governments to start to instill some sort of regulation around Bitcoin or the broader crypto markets. We saw earlier this year out of New York, different legislation to curb Bitcoin mining. And we see this attempt out of quite a few different states, while other states have been more open and accepting of Bitcoin miners, on the basis of two parts: the actual price of Bitcoin itself and global adoption. What types of regulation would be the most hurtful to Bitcoin price and global adoption? For example, regulation against miners, or regulations directed towards individuals, or regulations around what banks can or can't do with Bitcoin and crypto at large?
Yeah, I mean, I think like ultimately, there's still a super bullish case for Bitcoin as an asset to reach 500,000 or even 1 million, while it ultimately didn't, unfortunately, doesn't live up to the expectations of. I mean, and certainly there will be people that use it and successfully anyway, regardless. But the kind of the anarcho cypherpunk dream of true. I mean that's still possible, but I think some of the like the banking regulations and whatnot, and just the clampdown of non KYC use is not going to really impact the financial use case or the financial upside potential all that much. But for a lot of people that would consider themselves plebs or libertarian, whatever you want to call it, just like I know there's a hardcore Bitcoin maximalist. There's a lot of things that can go wrong over the next decade that we have to fight against and prepare for. And I know I just kind of repeated myself there, but the banks right now have, like with the Basel requirements, can't really have that much Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And up against however much they have, I think they need to have an equal amount of cash, and it can't be more than 1%. So I think the regulations on the banking front or insurance industry or pensions or whatever will be increasingly bullish over the, I'm not talking the next 3, 6, 12 months, but over the next decade. Like it'll be opened up. There's obviously demand. The BlackRock announcement with Coinbase is like just the start of that, right? I think, and it'll continue to increase. But yeah, I mean, in terms of a particular regulation or not, I don't really have a definitive answer for you there. People want Bitcoin, including increasingly large asset allocators. I know it doesn't feel like it right now during this bear market, and I think we got a little bit to kind of sift through in terms of this bear market. I think people calling for a V-shaped recovery to all-time highs are a little bit delusional, but I'd love to be proven wrong there. So I don't really have a definitive answer for you. Again, Q, sorry, but
no, you do not need to apologize.
And I would just say that also for anyone listening in Twitter Spaces, we love to have people come up and ask questions, but we are just doing a duplicate stream on YouTube Live for Bitcoin Magazine and the video team. So we won't be having other people up today, although we would love to just kind of indulge in a convo with anyone, usually. Turn it back to you.
Thank you for that. You can come see all of our pretty faces from the Twitter space over on YouTube. So feel free to pop on over there, guys. I I want to keep going down this rabbit hole, if you will, or we could switch it over to macro. You guys can tell me either way. Curious
Yeah,
though.
I like, again, I know I'm repeating myself, but I see new people continuing to filter back into the room. So I'm just going to sound like a broken record for one more time. I guess I should just pin them. But yeah, like the founder of Tornado Cash, it's an open source Ethereum mixing wallet, like Samurai Wallet or Wasabi, which is, has already kind of, started to become OFAC compliant and blacklisting certain addresses. These are just ultimately like a collaborative Bitcoin transaction. People that call it a coin, mixing solution or whatever they try to call it, right? To try to criminalize it. It's just a Bitcoin transaction. It's just a collaborative spend, and that's just information. So like, the kind of you could make an argument that it's kind of like against free speech in a way, but the state's not going to really accept that. But it's just not a good precedent. The founder, just a builder of software is getting potentially canceled because he created something that the U.S. government didn't like, and they blamed Korean, I don't even know what the Treasury guy tweeted out. It was pretty ridiculous, but just a pretty important day in general, and not great for the privacy movement in general. But we've known it's been coming. We've known that. So. Just a matter of time.
So I want to play devil's advocate, and I'm not asking this question because I think any action is justified. I am just a vehicle to share a different idea. Let's ignore the Tornado Cash, but let's say this actually happened to Do Kwon or to Mashinsky. Would your feelings be different?
Well, let's distinguish, a fraud, Alex Mashinsky, and think what you want about, whether Do Kwon was building something earnest or knew it was, all a Ponzi all along. I'm not going to make that call here. But in terms of what, Alex Mashinsky and Celsius did, it was fraudulent. And so it's different than someone just building software. It's non-custodial. Like Tornado Cash is a non-custodial Ethereum mixer. You send in a transaction. I don't really know the exact technicals as well as they do with Bitcoin and mixing. But you send in Ethereum, and it's a smart contract, and it executes, and it mixes it up, and you can't tell what's the input, what's the output, is the base of it. And sorry if I bundled the response a little bit. The Roman Semenov, he doesn't actually touch the Ethereum, the founder or the creator of this software, right? So like again, and there's this like kind of really petty like ETH BTC flame war going on, where all this hype around the merge, and potentially the .eth Twitter cult will, go against the Bitcoin maximalist Twitter cult. Like it's all pretty dumb. And I think it's missing the bigger point that a clampdown is coming. And, whether Ethereum has its merits or is, kind of riding on the backs of Bitcoin is anybody's judge. I align probably more with the Bitcoin maximalist viewpoint. But screeching that everything's a scam over the past decade hasn't really served anyone well or protected anybody. People still go for the scams, and so maybe like we Bitcoiners should fine tune their message a little bit. Even though like I'm pretty bearish on all the other altcoins against Bitcoin relatively over the next year, 5 years, 10 years. I think Ethereum is tremendously overvalued at 50% of Bitcoin's market cap, but it doesn't mean I think that calling for more regulation into the labeling of Ethereum as a security is just probably the wrong way to go about it. To keep bringing it back here.
Yeah, so I guess to go back to your question, Q, like, is it justified if it was like some fraudulent activity or Mashinsky or something like that they're shutting down? I guess it doesn't really matter. I mean, if you do it for one, you're going to constantly find, the gray area to do it more and more. And it just gets back to the point that it's just two different systems completely and are always going to be because stable coins are going to be larger centralized issuers, no matter what chain, whether it's Tron or Ethereum that they're on, they're going to run into those issues. They still operate. I mean, stable coins by definition are just, a blockchain dollar version of the financial system that we have today. So, I don't think it really matters in terms of punishing whether it's for the illegal activity or not. I think it's just that now when you think of like in Bitcoin terms and the innovation, what it's meant to be is that you're going to have so many conversations. If Bitcoin's successful over the years and so many issues with trying to shut down rails for all sorts of reasons from a system that the United States has had, or the Western world really has had very strong financial control over, that they're going to be, essentially losing that power, and they're not going to be wanting to give that up in any such way. So again, it's just like one probably very small example, whether I think it was, kind of North Korean money laundering that's going to come up, and probably many are going to fight and say, that's very justifiable to, shut that down. And it just goes back to the censorship resistant kind of capabilities of all this, and are those, and what's truly like censorship resistant, and when Bitcoin, grows and it scales, and it's in these situations, is it going to prove that it's really truly censorship resistant? I mean, that's probably to me, like the largest risk. How much influence over, governments and businesses between blacklisting addresses and, trying to shut down some sort of like circular economy here? How much are they going to be able to do? And how much are the tools on Bitcoin going to be able to withstand that?
I think on this note, it's pretty interesting. Like, all the macro craziness we've seen over the last year. I'm not just talking about like financially, but the geopolitical tension that's increasingly being built with the United States and China, and just all of the, like the sanctioning of treasury reserves. We're a long ways away from Bitcoin being anything from than a shortfall asset, a 24/7, 365 inverse VIX. Right? S&P ticks down or up. Bitcoin is just beta on that, and it's just kind of this reflection of the liquidity tide and all that extra speculation kind of sloshing around. But once Bitcoin is, if we do reach this point of like, Bitcoin's at 500,000, it's kind of equivalent to gold, even bigger than that. Bitcoin becomes liquid enough for it becomes the enemy of monies, but not at a level of drug dealers and small speculators now, like it was in 2011 and like it is now in 2022. But in say 2020, whatever, right? However long it takes, it's going to be liquid enough for nations, adversarial nations, to hold it in their reserves as a treasury asset at the largest level, like sovereign, Bitcoin mining, and the reality that the game theory of digital money and not your keys, not your coins at a nation state levels, like not your central bank reserves. It's like, it's not your system. And ultimately, I think the game theory of Bitcoin long term is that people, institutions, and eventually sovereigns are going to opt into something where they have the rules, like, in their favor, with whether it's absolute scarcity, rising production cost, and you get to decide that there's no more than 21 million coins by running your own software. And the bet on Bitcoin is the bet that people converge upon that, because there's no other alternative. You can't use USDC and you can't use USTs, US treasuries, if you're Russia or China, right? Say, what if China invades Taiwan? And I'm not going to pretend and LARP here like I'm some geopolitical expert and know what Xi Jinping's going to do with Taiwan. I don't know. But I do know that the trend of, increasing hostility between, the biggest institutions and sovereigns on the planet is going to increase, and the trust in this international monetary order that has been built up, for the last really 80 years since Bretton Woods, and if you look, post 1971, that order became free float fiat currencies. It's this experiment. We're really only 51 years into it, and so what happens when all of this, kind of boils to a head, and you see, massive competitive debasement. And kind of fraying of this international monetary order, which we've arguably started to see over the last 2 years at an increasing pace, and probably in the next 3 to 5. Well, Bitcoin probably is there, right? So like, I'm pretty short-term bearish. I think equities have a leg down, and that we still haven't seen the biggest, volatility event in this financial meltdown. But on the topic of like, censorship resistance, it's really, I think, one of the biggest bull cases is thinking about that geopolitical game theory, looking why gold itself failed as global money, and really, global money between sovereigns at the biggest level, why that failed and why that trust, that link, that relationship failed. And then look into Bitcoin or really anything. Look into Bitcoin, look into Ethereum, look into USDC, and evaluate really every asset on the planet in terms of what's going to, fill this kind of need, this global need for a neutral reserve asset. And like my bet, my conclusion is Bitcoin, but that's me personally. So, I guess everyone has to make that for themselves, but that's, kind of my thesis here.
I don't want to give people the roadmap necessarily, but do each of you mind, because you both have this same thesis that Bitcoin is the ultimate asset that all money will end up pouring itself into. What are the sort of clues or the things that stood out to you in your process of coming to this thesis that for Bitcoin stood out?
I can take a stab at it to start. Me and Dylan might have similar views on this. We talked about it before. I think the biggest framework that I used when I was studying this is really the Ray Dalio framework, and I know that's one that Lynn's looked into and Preston, and it really helped shape more of a historic economic view of how monetary systems are rising and breaking down with kind of credit and debt and cycles, and ultimately a problem that we've really never figured out. And in the conclusion of kind of every single one of these, conclusion of a debt cycle reaching its end and something being born anew, or just kind of history of civilizations breaking down when you get to points of kind of political and social unrest, not just kind of high levels of debt to GDP monetary debasement with lack of productivity that you can do, is that it's inevitable almost every single time through history is that people move to some of the hardest assets that they can find out of their basically a need to just save onto their purchasing power, that essentially the system is moving against them, it is failing, and you have this choice and this alternative and this option, and it's just in your own incentive structure to do that. And so for me, that's kind of necessarily how I think about it, kind of the economic machine that we're in today. Really the only solution that's been done, tried, tested, done again, is more perpetual kind of monetary debasement, or running really high levels of inflation to kind of fix the credit kind of debt cycle mismatch that we're in today. And so when that arises, it's interesting to me that then you have this software technology truly decentralized on this type of S-curve adoption. I know that's maybe sometimes a meme to talk about that, but it really has a similar traction or potential as what the internet and mobile smartphone adoptions are about. And for the first time, you have this for a form of money or form of store value or purchasing power in that way. So you kind of have these two forces coming up against each other. And we have this kind of solution for the first time where gold has never really been successful in being able to do that for a lot of reasons. So that to me is a recipe for real potential and adoption to occur as that's playing out. Now, a lot of those things can play out for a really long time. Reserves currencies can hold their status for a very long time post, kind of declines or the turning points that we've seen. And so it's one of those things that I think now we're just in the first kind of initial stages and years or decades of watching that play out.
Well said, sir.
Shall we move on to the monthly report?
Yeah, sure. We can
Yeah,
talk
let's do it.
Some finance macro. Why everything's going to shit.
All hail macro. Let's just do the broad strokes of this. What are the things that are standing out to you guys, and what are the things that are having the most impact both on the macro environment as well as the price of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, so our shorter term thesis is that we're in the midst of a bear market rally in risk. So you've seen throughout 2022, the trend was long duration assets got killed as yields exploded upwards on the increasing inflation prints. So we saw for the first time in I think 40 years a bond equity correlation persist for months on end during a sell-off. Traditionally, kind of the risk parity was that equities and bonds kind of hedged each other, bonds hedging equity losses as yields during a sell-off, during the start of a global slowdown, and we just got a technical recession print. But really, kind of the turning of a debt cycle, usually you see yields have an inverse correlation with equities. So risk parity, the kind of the bread and butter of legacy finance, got killed, and really just the everything bubble started to deflate is what happened. is essentially the easiest way to say it. So Bitcoin obviously was very, very correlated to that and served as beta. And a lot of that leverage that kind of accumulated during the 2-year bull market, everyone swimming naked when the tide washed out got wrecked and washed up to shore. So this was the first kind of open interest or the cascade to fall was kind of the centralized exchange leverage, like futures open interest and all that, from 60K to say 40,000. And then from 40,000 and down to 20 was a lot of kind of hidden layers of obfuscated leverage. We had the Luna Ponzi that imploded. You had Three Arrows Capital, the biggest, most notorious hedge fund in the space, was unsecured borrowing from all these lenders or partially collateralized. So all of this unwound, right? While Bitcoin was basically traded like a derivative of the S&P 500. And since then, we've kind of bottomed in risk and stocks and equity specifically, as volatility's really kind of been crushed, implied volatility, if you look at, like, say, the VIX, as a lot of late shorts, late hedges, and this is true for both Bitcoin and equities, a lot of that kind of late hedging, late selling by funds, by allocators, they got their face ripped off, late shorts and kind of late put options specifically. This is for both equities and Bitcoin. And so now you've seen, Bitcoin actually relatively just underperform equities if you just compare the two assets, and you're seeing stuff like the yield curve and just a lot of economic indicators in general, like consumer sentiment and all this, come in at really, really ugly numbers. I mean, the yield curve precedes recessions and huge kind of drawdowns in equity markets, and it's the lowest it's been in 22 years, the 10-2 specifically. So the bond market's saying that this is really bad and the Fed's over tightening, and while risk continues to kind of melt up and a lot of people are calling for the end of the bull market, and so we're a little more cautious on that statement and think that while 17,000 is certainly a very strong low and we got a lot of support between that, and for Bitcoin specifically, we think we're kind of in a bear market rally for risk, and you can kind of look at previous equity market bear markets to look at that. And so, this everything bubble unwind is still underway in our view, as inflation is political enemy number one around the world. And I think what happens, and like you've seen in previous debt cycles, is that the Fed and their tightening policy, and I think truly, it's not that they're competent or not. It's just the reality that 12 men in a room, and really the Fed decide monetary policy for the world, given the dollar's currency status, world reserve currency status. It's just that 12 men setting an arbitrary cost of capital or price of money, price of time maybe is the better word, for the entire world ends badly. And oftentimes, they break things without meaning to break things, right? They try to not break anything, but it's just such a complex system that something somewhere somehow breaks. And with every cycle, there's more and more debt, there's more and more leverage. Debt levels relative to productivity levels around the world are higher, and which requires ever lower yields. So now we see this inflation spike, and it's still very, very high, and the Fed's trying to address it. And I think ultimately Sam and I's thesis, and I don't mean to speak for him, but we talk almost every day and kind of agree here, is that final volatility event where really the only two asset safe havens are the dollar, which is a paradox because over the long term it's politically programmed to devalue, but the only safe havens in these sort of events are the dollar, given that it's the currency that's in short supply. It's the fiat currency going through basically a short squeeze as credit contracts, and long volatility, and that can be in the form of really anything, but during these moments, we say long vol because correlations go to one as everything: commodities, bonds, equities, and more liquid things like, say, even real estate, kind of go to one and sell off in dollar terms. And so we still think that event hasn't really played out yet. So while we've certainly seen a nice rebound in everything, Bitcoin broadly, crypto markets, equity markets, we think that there's more downside to come potentially over the next however really long it takes for something to break, as niche or as cliche as that sounds.
Yeah, when Dylan and I were going through this, we have a running joke all the time, and it might be our bias, our framework. I mean, we're trying to be objective as possible when we think about this. Is like, the joke is like we can't find a bullish chart at the moment because there's so many economic data points that are pointing to this kind of lack of conclusion in what we talk about, right? This potential for a dollar liquidity crisis playing out, that this turnover or reacceleration in kind of economic metrics. So if you're looking at any of the economic leading indicators, or you're looking at PMI data around the world across countries, which some are, now printing contractions for the first time. You're looking at GDP growth estimates that are constantly getting revised down. You're looking at earnings estimates that are getting revised down, but still are incredibly high for the year relative to these other like stronger tail risk bear markets that have played out before, these kind of like 2000 or 2008 or 1978 type markets that turn over. So I think I find it odd to try and conclude that this is a bottom here for, what you call it, Bitcoin and crypto assets or equities. They're all following each other. They're all following, equities. Equities gone down, or at least bounced back up from their lows so far, maybe 14, 15%. If you're looking at the S&P, Bitcoin's followed and done, 30 or 40%. If you're looking from like the super bottom wick and the 17s that we had. Altcoins are even beyond that, which to me is a strange sign to see so much appreciation in terms of that risk. That tells me that a lot of risk in the market is still here and hasn't really been killed yet, which would be strange if that were really talking about how overvalued everything's become. A good way to look at that is just to look at broader PE ratios or the Robert Shiller CAPE PE ratios. Which just take earnings over the last 10 years, which are just good measures of overvaluations. And those usually things revert back to their mean and median values. And we're still incredibly overvalued and high in all of those relative to history going back into, late 1800s. So it would be strange for me to see, to really have a lot of confidence in the bottom here with what's happening kind of with the economic machine around the world. I think one of the more interesting points that just came out wasn't in our report as of late, but the UK just being a reflection of what some of the dynamics are going on in Europe, is that their central bank, Bank of England, is projecting deep recession 5 quarters through 2023, and inflation to be 9% through 2023 as well, and mostly on the backs of kind of nearly doubled energy prices. So I think we're going to constantly see more and more projections to get worse. That's generally how it goes. You have these forecasts, you have consensus forecasts, and more data comes out. It gets worse and worse. And that doesn't necessarily, markets are probably going to lead that. But I look at this and just say, within the context of Bitcoin, the S&P, whatever you're looking at, whatever assets, all of these are in like these reasonable kind of bear market rally territories that we see a lot. Things get overshorted. Fear comes into markets kind of rebound, they adjust, and then we kind of go through a no cyclical component of that. So that's the framework we use. And really we lean that way because haven't heard a convincing bullish argument to turn us in the other way. So I think it's a good scenario to think about. If you really believe in the long-term Bitcoin thesis, I think you could look at a lot of mean reversion metrics here and say, yeah, it's great to allocate and pick Bitcoin up when you have a 5-10 year view. A lot of people don't have that, or they're not ready for that type of conviction. So, knowing the downside or the potential that could come here and just keeping that in mind, because if it doesn't come and all of a sudden things are better economically globally around the world and things are rising again, or, we turn into a major Fed pivot because we have to, because the treasury market seizes up, and things change, then it'll be fine. Then you're in a new paradigm, and it's a different allocation discussion. So that's kind of give a rough overview. I kind of bounced around a lot of stuff there.
No, I mean, to be honest, your guys' report was so extensive that I appreciate how much in this just brief conversation we were able to have. You covered so much. I have one final question before I turn the mics over to you, but I do want to remind everyone, if you want to really dive in deeper, I highly, highly recommend just head on over to Substack or bitcoinmagazinepro.com and subscribe to this newsletter. Their monthly report was far more detailed than we could ever spend. It would take us more than 3 hours to really get into the weeds of everything that they did. I love hearing that you guys were trying to find those bullish charts and you couldn't quite find anything. So my final question to each of you, the type of question I know Dylan hates, but we get the CPI print on Wednesday. Are you expecting higher or lower?
I don't even know, man. I just, whatever it is, I have no idea. I'm not the one that trades. You know, I don't just like to gamble my money before a CPI print. You know, because the equities are the markets will, you know, knee jerk reaction one way or another. But it's too high. You know, whatever it is, it's too high, and it's you know, that Fed dual mandate. They're gonna, as long as employment's as high it is, they're gonna try to, and even if that's not the real number, right? Like both inflation and CPI and employment, right? People are hurting. The American consumer's hurting. The American worker's hurting. Real wages are going down, right? Like, so it's all bad. It's all bad news. And so the Fed's going to try to, you know, they basically said they're going to try to deflate markets, deflate asset prices until that changes. And just kind of, you know, our view is that they overdo it like they seemingly always do. And, you know, just the reality of the fiscal situation and the treasuries, we kind of, we borrowed a little bit of Luke Groman's thesis on just the U.S. Treasury and fiscal situation, and, you know, the reality that tax receipts, as, you know, as we enter a recession, and we, you know, we try to clamp down on this overheated economy, things are going to swing really hard the other way. And with high yields, you know, raging inflation and all this, the U.S. won't be really able to finance itself, and that's why the Fed will have to step back in eventually. And so, I mean, we have time, right? It's not like Bitcoin's not going to go to 1 million tomorrow, and that's okay. That's a good thing because we have more time to buy it.
Yeah, definitely would not be making any trades or trying to gamble around CPI prints. Don't know if it's going to come in below or above consensus. Thoughts are that, you know, core CPI, which is really, you know, less food and energy, kind of dumb metric for the everyday individual who's kind of tracking where inflation is going against them. But what Fed uses quite a bit just to look at like sticky type of inflation. I think there's a good analysis case to be made that could still be accelerating through the year. So you might get headline kind of CPI still decelerating, but like the core stuff that the policy is most focused on in terms of their tightening is still accelerating. Obviously, I think the big issue now, and coming through what the latest labor market kind of report was, is that unemployment fell from 3% to 3.5% to 3.6%. And, you know, it's not all good news in terms of jobs underneath that in that report. But the biggest thing is that, you know, if unemployment is not rising, then there is a stronger pressure on wages, which are the stickier piece to that kind of inflation component. So, you know, nominal wages, if you look at like what the Atlanta Fed is saying, they're up, you know, 6.7%. If you look at like average earnings, which is another way to look at it, it's up 5.2%. It's all accelerating, which is, again, not a good sign for the Fed. So, you know, that's part of that CPI calculation. So I'm guessing they're both looking at that core CPI and wages, which haven't really slowed down yet, which, you know, leads me back to the point of that unless you see, you know, kind of Luke Groman thesis, treasury market seizes up over the next month, which is certainly a risk and could happen. It's hard to see a Fed pivot anytime soon politically just for the inflation alone, and especially for the wage inflation, because, you know, as with wages, once those start to get set, they become really sticky and it doesn't go away for a long time. So the Fed's still, you know, kind of New York Fed's still projecting 5%, which I think is pretty conservative through the rest of the year. And still, you know, pretty stronger inflation by then, and you won't get 2% until 2024. And so wages play a big part of that. So not sure where it's going to go, if it's going to beat, but still expect that, you know, we're months away from kind of the tightening cycle being over, you know, which goes back to, you know, the Bitcoin point again. You know, it's going to follow some of these macro liquidity cycles. And obviously the balance sheet, what the Fed's trying to do, no matter, let's say they, you know, can only get off 10% and they have to turn around, it's still a lot of reduction and tightening to attempt and to go. And if that's achievable in some version, Bitcoin and risk assets are going to likely follow that.
Guys, you know how much of a degenerate I am. I'm just trying to make a quick bet over under, but I guess I'm on my own on this one. I do want to remind everyone this full interview will be made available over on the YouTube channel. So we are about to wind this down. Before I hand it off to each of you to plug Bitcoin Magazine Pro, I want to remind everyone this is pure signal. These two do an excellent job of really cutting through the clutter and giving you the exact data and information that you need, as well as very thoughtful analysis and how they are drawing their conclusions. I'll turn it over to the two of you to shill what you guys do best.
Yeah, just I mean, if you enjoyed this content, we just kind of map it out in a more visual form with Bitcoin Magazine Pro with free and paid. And so that monthly report was just released to everybody if you want to check it out. And kind of appreciate everyone tuning in. Next time, or if we don't do the YouTube live show next time, we do a space. We'll certainly love to kind of interact more with the Twitter crowd and talk and have some questions. But until then, appreciate everyone tuning in.
Yeah, cheers, guys. Thanks for having us again, Q.
Thank you both for joining us. Thank you, everyone who is tuning in, watching, and listening to all of us. I do want to remind everyone tickets for Bitcoin Amsterdam are on sale. Use promo code BMLive to get 10% off of those tickets. Do it for the children. The children are P, myself, and Chris. Please, for our sake. And of course, the censorship-resistant issue of the print magazine is currently available at Barnes & Noble stores near you, as well as, I believe, Indigo in Canada. If you don't want to actually go to a physical store to pick up the behemoth, this is thick. This is a thick magazine, guys. If you don't want to go to the store itself to pick it up, use promo code BMLive to get 10% off of the individual magazine or a full year subscription to this quarterly print magazine. That's all we got for you guys. Get back to work.